Can I welcome members, invited guests and the public, both here and watching on webcast, to today's meeting of the Environment Committee. Now, today's meeting will principally be a question and answer session with the Deputy Mayor for Environment and Energy, Shirley Rodriguez, to discuss the Mayor of London's programmes and commitments. We encourage anyone to take part in the discussion on social media using the hashtag AssemblyEnv. And we have a few short items of formal business to go through before we start. So firstly, please can everyone make sure that your electronic devices are switched to silent and not vibrate to avoid any unnecessary interruptions during the meeting. Do we have any apologies?
Yes, Chair, we've received apologies from Assembly Member Bailey and Assembly Member Curtin.
Thank you very much. And can I ask the committee to note the list of offices set out at item 2 of the agenda, and also ask if members have any other interests to declare?
Noted and no.
Thank you. Can I ask the committee to confirm the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 13th of February 2020 as a correct record?
Agreed.
Thank you. Can I ask the committee to note the completed and outstanding actions from previous meetings?
Noted.
Thank you. So this now brings us to today's main item, a question and answer session with the Deputy Mayor for Environment and Energy. So we're going to be discussing the climate emergency, London's housing, building resilience in the capital, waste and recycling, and air quality. So can I welcome Shirley Rodriguez, who is the Deputy Mayor for Environment and Energy, and Aaron Wood, who is the Assistant Director for Environment, and also Peter Dorr, who is the Interim Policy and Programme Manager for Climate Mitigation and Adaptation, and Andrew Jones, the Policy and Programme Manager for Green Infrastructure and we have other officers who will be joining us in the second half, who I will introduce later. So that brings us to our questions. And the first question is about the Green New Deal. And I was wondering, in February, the Mayor announced his 50 million Green New Deal in the budget to help support the reduction of emissions and achieve net zero carbon by 2030. So can you give us an indication of how this funding would be used to achieve that goal?
Thank you, Chair. And before I do, I wanted just to make an opening statement. I think we'd agreed that we would just do a short
I'm sorry,
statement.
I hadn't been informed about that, but...
GLA, Chamber, Sound. GLA, Chamber, Sound. GLA, Chamber, Sound. GLA, Chamber, Sound. GLA, Chamber.
Members Nikki Gavron, Jeanette Arnold and Tony Arbour, who are stepping down at the upcoming election. So thank you. In terms of the Mayor's ambition, the Mayor has always said he wants to be the greenest Mayor ever, and since coming to office, he has set some of the toughest and boldest targets in the world, and will continue to work to make London a zero carbon, zero waste city with the best air quality of any major world city, as well as thriving green spaces. On air quality, last year the Mayor introduced the world's first and award-winning ultra-low emission zone. We've seen nitrogen dioxide pollution in central London now reduced by 1/3, an immediate and significant impact that will reduce health impacts and save the NHS billions over the coming years. To help prepare for the ULEZ introduction, he's launched a £48 million fund to help small businesses, sole traders, charities and low-income Londoners to trade in their polluting vehicles. He's led by example by cleaning up buses and taxis. The promised 12 low-emission bus zones have all been completed a year ahead of schedule, and these have seen an average reduction of NOx emissions of more than 90% along some of the most polluted routes in the city, helping to reduce Londoners' exposure to toxic air. Over 85% of TfL's bus fleet meet or exceed Euro 6, and this is on track for compliance in the whole fleet by 2020, and we now have the largest zero-emission fleet in Western Europe. We have more than 3,200 zero-emission capable taxis licensed since January 2018, And all of this work has been underscored by the delivery of a big increase in the rapid charge point network, with 232 on our streets and over 2,000 standard charge points since the start of the term. And of course, we're going to be talking about climate change, where the Mayor has declared a climate emergency. He was the first Mayor of a C40 megacity to do that. London has been A-rated 2 years in a row by CDP for climate action. And we were one of the first global cities to implement a climate action plan compatible with the Paris Agreement and aiming to keep global warming below a 1.5 degrees degree rise. And as you've mentioned, the Mayor announced a £50 million package to support this work on a Green New Deal for London, which will be aimed at reducing emissions and other harmful environmental impacts, whilst equipping the capital's citizens and businesses with the skills and jobs needed for the transition to zero carbon.
GLA, Chamber, Sound.
To provide energy to all Londoners that will save them money whilst also being good for the environment. It charges no exit fees, and any surpluses made by the GLA is going to be reinvested into environmental and social projects. In terms of planning, London is the only major city in the UK to have a zero carbon home standard, which will be extended to commercial developments. And the current work is already achieving 39% more carbon savings than national building regs. And the London plan also includes pioneering policies on whole life cycle carbon. Alongside this, since the start of the term, the Mayor's Energy for Londoners programme has seen retrofitting of over 26,800 homes, and we've just launched a new programme which will see much deeper retrofits, delivering on average 2.5 times more carbon savings than an average retrofit. The Mayor's divested GLA cash assets from fossil fuels, and he's been working with the London Pension Fund Authority to develop a climate policy that has seen it divest from companies such as BP, Shell and Exxon. And finally, I'm sure many of you saw the historic ruling where the Mayor, working with several London boroughs and environmental groups such as Friends of the Earth, Plan B and Greenpeace, won a judicial review against the third runway at Heathrow. This was a landmark judgment, calling into question the government's decision not to take into account the Paris Agreement. We continue to recognise the twin dangers of climate and ecological emergencies and that they have to be tackled in tandem. Last summer, London became the first ever national park city, and this is partly because we've invested over £13 million in greening the capital, we've planted over 280,000 trees and seen over 275 hectares of green space improvements. And finally, on waste, we're doing all we can to turn the scourge of single-use plastic. Working with ZSL and Thames Water, we now have 63 operational water fountains across London, and this is on top of the 3,500 refill points established across the city, compared to only 200 when the scheme first started in 2018. We continue to work with boroughs to cut waste and increase their recycling rates. All boroughs have submitted their reduction and recycling plans to show how they're going to demonstrate conformity with the Mayor's strategy on greater consistency of materials collection and boosting recycling, especially of food waste. So as I'm sure you'll agree, the Mayor has made significant progress over the past 4 years in being the greenest Mayor ever and making London greener, healthier and cleaner. And I just wanted to end by saying thank you to the environment team, because they've done absolutely fantastic work over the last 4 years. We have written a new strategy, we have created new programmes and delivered a number of programmes. And what I'm really, really proud of is their tenacity in getting those things done. I shouldn't really say getting those things done, in delivering on those impacts. And we are really seeing big changes in London because of their work. So I just wanted to pay tribute to the team. And of course, I look forward to working with you all in the future to realise this shared ambition of making London the greenest city in the world.
Thank you very much. Probably covered all our questions for this morning, but we're going to delve in a bit more depth and detail. But thank you very much for that opening statement. So yes, my first question is about the Green New Deal, and just wondering what the Mayor is going to do with that £50 million and how he's going to direct it towards achieving his goals.
So the Mayor announced this £50 million fund to support the delivery of a new Green Deal for Londoners, and it's going to be aimed at supporting projects to reduce London's climate change emissions, other harmful environmental impacts, including from our toxic air. But also, as I mentioned earlier, it's about making sure that Londoners, the citizens in London, as well as our businesses, are really equipped for that transition to a zero carbon future. It's a 3-year fund running from this financial year through 2021 to 2022 to 2023. And it's going to cover a number of areas. So the team are working up the potential criteria for this. But when we announced it, the Mayor was very clear that the principles would be around collaboration, that we want real impacts for Londoners, particularly the most disadvantaged. And we want to accelerate the pace of change, the scale up that we need in London to really meet the challenge that we're seeing of, we're seeing climate change impacts already, and we need to really up the pace on how we reduce our emissions. And there are a number of things that we've talked about that this fund might be available for, so we're just looking at what that might be, but anything from, creating a new challenge fund for boroughs, or looking at ways to use the funding to unlock investment that we need to achieve net zero, particularly private sector finance. We know we've got huge amounts of funding needed to support that transition, looking at new ways of looking at consumption-based emissions, how we might improve the multifunctional use of our green belt. So various potential options on what we do. And as I've mentioned before, skills is a particular part of that as well. Mm-hmm. So the Mayor having announced that, the team are now looking at what those potential uses will be, and we'll be announcing some of those shortly.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that we heard in our our last meeting about climate resilience was we were looking at energy and insulation of our homes. And one of the points came up that, because we've, as a committee, I think, had a massive focus on fuel poverty, quite rightly, but there's also the able to pay sector where there's not funding for people to invest in, or not affordable funding for people to invest to insulate their homes, to then realise those future savings on energy expenditure. And I just wondered if you'd thought about some kind of mayoral scheme for providing affordable loans for people to be able to insulate their homes, so that we get that scaled up work on insulation.
Yeah, the focus has very much been on where, trying to look at carbon emissions and fuel poverty together, which is why we've been looking at the sort of social housing programmes, but also private tenants. So we've sort of opened up part of the scheme to look at improving the efficiency of energy efficiency of private tenants' homes, and so either the tenants or the landlords can apply, but obviously they need each other's sort of permissions. The able to pay area has been a really difficult one, and you remember sort of previous government programmes that have started and then been sort of cut off at very quickly, which has sort of damaged the supply chain, but also the momentum around it. So our focus has really been, given the scale of challenge that we need to retrofit London's homes, including those who are able to pay, has really been on getting government to really prioritise it as a national infrastructure priority. So obviously we were disappointed in yesterday's budget that there was no mention of that. There was a lot of mention about a number of other schemes. We're given to believe that this will be part of a conversation around the national infrastructure strategy, which is due shortly, that government has said. So we will continue to lobby for that, because as you'll appreciate, certainly in our strategy and in our 1.5 degree plan, in order to get London to be net zero, we are going to have to retrofit the hundreds of thousands of homes that we have in London, and we have a particularly big problem in London in that the stock of homes that we have is very different, from Georgian houses through to mansion blocks, through to tower blocks and so on. So they all need different approaches, but they all need to be retrofitted.
Yep. I'm going to move us on yes.
Can I just join in on that one? So obviously one of the issues for London is that the stock, unlike the local authorities elsewhere, and also obviously in London, the local authorities themselves, is not owned by the GLA. So that sort of means that we need to rely a lot more on our local authority partners to deliver the improvements to housing stock in their areas, or to come forward with that same level of encouragement. So quite a few have now declared climate emergencies around London, but not all. So I wonder what work you're doing with the ones who've declared a climate emergency, but also with the ones that haven't, to ensure that they are setting and also meeting targets that are as ambitious as, you know, the Mayor has now set out. Because otherwise we're not going to get anywhere, are we?
Indeed, and I think the Mayor's pointed out that, you know, this needs action from all sectors. So on the climate emergency, we believe sort of in the order of 25, 28 boroughs have declared climate emergencies, and obviously each of those boroughs is looking to see how that can be taken forward in their own area. They've all got slightly different targets. But what we have done is set out of some advice to those boroughs about the sorts of technical assistance programmes and funding programmes that the Mayor has set up, so that they don't reinvent the wheel in terms of analysis, that, you know, they could be using some of the modelling that we have already done, so that they're not paying sort of expensive consultants to redo work that's already been done. We held a workshop about a couple of weeks ago where pretty much every borough, I believe, was represented. At that meeting where the team went through. Was that
with London councils?
Yes. It was in partnership. Well, it was in partnership with London councils and with their borough officer leads, LEDNet, which is the Environmental Directors Network. And then we went through the various programmes that we have, and we've committed to do further work with both London councils and LEDNet to take that forward. So we were really encouraged about. You know, there's a lot of excitement out in the boroughs, and I think, you know, because they're being driven by their residents, but also by their businesses, about, you know, asking for help on what we might be able to do, and it really does need all of us to work together on that. So we're really pleased to be doing that.
Oh, well, that sounds quite encouraging. Can I ask the opposite question, though? Because obviously support at government level, you just mentioned the budget and being a bit disappointed. The government has talked about net zero by 2050. Is there any movement on that? Is the Mayor lobbying for that to be brought forward to 2030? I think if we don't set out with 2030 as the very ambitious target, even if we miss it and still hit net zero by 2035, at least that's better than having a target of 2050, which does concern me. Are we managing to get any movement on that at government level?
Well, the Mayor has said that if he's re-elected, he will set an ambition for London to be net zero by 2030. Yes. We have been really clear that the sort of sources of emissions over which he has powers is really, you know, it's only about half of those emissions that he can control or has levers over. So we would absolutely rely, whether it's a 2050 or 2030 target, on government really stepping up and taking the action, both that they've committed to do, so, you know, under the sort of guidance that or plans that they've set out and that the Committee on Climate Change have looked at around decarbonising the grid, continuing to do that at pace, but also a number of other areas they've talked about, you know, to accelerate, for example, the phasing out of fossil-fuelled ICE vehicles. We've been lobbying very hard that should be a 2030 target. The government have said 2040. They're now talking about bringing that forward, but still not confirmed that or doing it quickly enough. There are a number of other areas. We talked about energy efficiency, we talked about electrification. You know, there were some sums in the budget yesterday that are helpful. The big problem for us, or the big unknown for us, is London able to access that funding? We know on, for example, air quality funding that we don't get access, or transport funding, which is a real problem, I think, for delivery in the UK as a whole. You know, London has a big footprint. It's a big opportunity. We drive big supply chains. So not investing in London is a failure, I think, on the UK government's part.
Well, I'm pretty sure we're going to come back to air quality, and Caroline was just about to ask you something about energy, I think. So I'll be quiet now.
Thank you very much. Yes. So in terms of thinking about power and energy for Londoners, there was a 12-month pilot project in 2018, the Licence Light, which was exploring buying clean energy across London. Now, there was meant to be, I think, an independent evaluation of Licence Light, and we just were wondering if that has been completed, and if so, can the committee be sent a copy of the evaluation, and if not, when is it going to be completed?
I don't have that as a note down, but I think I can follow up and check unless the officers know whether that is available. But we'd be very happy to follow up.
Yeah, so I think the work has been completed, so I don't see any reason why it can't be forwarded.
That would be great. Thank you very much. So I want to move on to talk about London Power, which was launched on the 13th of January. And there are various kind of models of how London Power is going to do and which depend on uptake. So is the uptake so far better or worse than expected?
It's too early to say. We were due to launch London Power last year, but then with the government election and the pre-election period, we had to delay. So we've really, London Power's only been running, I think, for about 2 months now. So it's far too soon. You know, it's a startup. So it's very hard to get or to take meaningful lessons or data or trends at this point.
So how long do you think you need before you're going to be able to get some meaningful data out of it so that you can sort of get a sense of which of the customer uptake scenarios of the ones that have been modelled is going to be the most likely?
Well, normally you'd take a full year, wouldn't you, before you'd start thinking this is on track to you know, or potentially on track to what we want. But, you know, we've committed to London Power will develop or publish an annual report after a year of operation, and we've said that we'll publish some data probably after the first full quarter. So probably not till July, because the first quarter will be the end of June. So by the time it's all collated, it probably earliest will be later July, July this year.
Okay, but you don't think that'll give us sense of whether it's performing as you'd hoped?
I think for an energy retail company, you probably need to have at least 2 seasons. So
2 years.
One season, one full season, and we launched in January. So you won't capture the kind of the deep customer switching period, which will happen in the autumn traditionally. So we'll need to get through that phase this year to really understand kind of what a 12-month kind of business cycle might look like with people switching and so on. As the Deputy Mayor said, we'll be releasing quarterly statistics on progress, as well as an annual report. So we'll be able to understand it better, I think, after a year than we will mid-year, for example.
Okay, well, we will, I'm sure, make a note to pick up on that in a year's time.
Just on that precise point, are you telling us it's going to be a whole year before you're I just heard what you said about July, before you're going to be able to tell us whether you've met any milestones? There must have been a milestone for how many people you're going to sign up in the first month and things of that sort. I mean, can I ask you directly, have you signed up anybody at all?
And up me?
Yes.
And the Mayor?
Yes,
and
I'll ask you, Shirley, or the officer was giving us the timetable.
So let me answer that. You know, this is a novel business for the GLA. It is a novel thing to do to set up an energy company and run something London-wide. So we have taken time to assess that the model that we've gone down is the right one for London, and we're very confident of that. We have gone through a big procurement service to test that we've got the right partner and the right contract, which we believe we have. And informally, from the feedback that we're getting from you know, through our partner, Octopus Power, and you know, others, you know, it's going very well in terms of the sort of the pricing that people are getting. You know, the reduction in energy prices in the order of, I think, £350 compared to the sort of standard variable tariffs, which people like. It's green energy, you know, the fact that we're recycling any profits when they are made from the Mayor into environmental and social projects, and the customer service. These are all unique. You know, the deal we have struck is a very unique one in the market. So to make sure that we fully understand its efficacy and its effectiveness, it does take a full business cycle, I think.
Yes,
So.
those are all very good warm words, and you recall I wrote you actually asking for something not just warm but hard as well. And you said all of that was confidentially commercial. See, I'm wondering whether or not Octopus might be taking you for a bit of a ride, because if you're not going to be actually investigating them until a whole season has gone, and I bet they come up with saying that the present circumstance means that this particular season is going to be untypical, and they could spin it out. Let me give you a simple anecdote. Octopus telephoned one of my constituents and offered them the deal with the same warm words that you, Shirley, have used. But they didn't say that they were London Energy. They said they were Octopus Energy. And it was only when pushed that London Power, it was only when pushed they revealed that they were London Power. The advertisements on TfL bus stops still refer to Octopus. They don't say London Power. And I do wonder whether or not we're monitoring this really well. They seem to have got the GLA, if you like, and remember I've asked you questions on this, and you're not expecting to make any profit for some time, that in effect Octopus is using the good name of the GLA for selling their thing. I mean, how hard are you riding these people to ensure that Londoners know that this, if you like, is a social enterprise? I suppose that's a kind of way of putting it, being run for the benefit of Londoners rather than for the benefit of Octopus.
I think if you talk to Octopus, I think they would feel that they haven't been driven as hard as we have driven them. I've had an excellent team of officers from here in TfL who've driven a very hard deal with Octopus, because we know this is about delivering value for taxpayers. We have extensive, I don't know how many, 30-odd SLA, service level agreements, each of which are monitored regularly. Some of them are daily monitored with Octopus. We have frequent meetings with them to monitor what they are supposed to be doing and delivering. In terms of the advertising, it's absolutely clear that that we promote London Power. They promote London Power. They are themselves an energy company, so we'll be promoting, as would other energy companies, their own company services. But when you reflect and you look at the two deals, you compare lots of things. Are they green? Do they reinvest in London? Are they really a truly not-for-profit? Are they providing green gas? All of those sorts of things.
With the greatest respect, you're not answering my question, which effectively is Octopus trading on our good name as far as this is concerned. If you're riding them daily and and we are this hard-nosed client, you must therefore be able to tell me how many people they have signed up. You must therefore be able to tell me that they are advertising the deal in London as London Power and not Octopus. I've challenged you on those two specific points where
and
they
I
have.
can give you those numbers, but they're commercially confidential, so I can't release them to you.
I find that a very weak. I find that a very weak excuse.
Let
me phrase the question another way. Did you have a target for the number of people who will be signed up in month one?
We, as I mentioned to you when we first came to the committee last time, we have a number of scenarios on what London Power might be able to deliver. It depends on rate of take-up, what part of the switching season it is, what the offer is, what comparable offers are against it, against the London Power offer, lots of different variables. So we have a good sense of what we've asked London Power to do in terms of service levels, which they're meeting. There's a whole chain, the stock market crash, not quite crash, but, the drop the other day, the oil market fight between Russia and the Saudis, all affects pricing, which then affects the number of people who want to switch. There are lots of external factors that sort of provide the context for how London Power operates, and we have a very good team that is monitoring what they're doing.
Honestly, Deputy Mayor, that is very weak. There are always going to be circumstances when you're doing this, but when you went out to get these people, because this was one of the Mayor's things that he was going to have, this thing, and I've said to you, the prices do seem very reasonable. You know, when the time comes, I shall probably switch. But I would want to know that I am switching to this socially responsible company. It seems to me that Octopus may well be taking you for a ride, and because of your unwillingness to provide any kind of hard figures at all for how they're doing, they could be coming to you and saying, well, the virus is going to stop us from doing this, the oil price is going to stop us from doing that, you know, the sun is going to shine.
I'm not quite sure what more I can say. That we have a number of service level agreements, we have a lot of monitoring that we do, that I am absolutely confident that they are not taking us for a ride.
What democratic control is there over the service level agreements to see that they're being met? Who knows whether or not the service level agreements are going to be met?
So we have an internal governance mechanism, just like there is for a number of other contracts and services that the GLA connects with, or TfL does connect with.
Well, I won't take it any further. I find it very unsatisfactory, Chairman. Very unsatisfactory.
Can I just ask, how is it marketed actually as London Power? I mean, where could one see anything about it?
So it's a combination of advertising. So we've been advertising on the sides of buses, or bus shelters, or posters. That's one part of it, and that's the sort of kick-off marketing. As London Power.
And what it's offering.
And then there's a lot of social marketing that the company does as London Power. So, you know, you won't get Octopus talked about in the marketing unless there's a requirement by Ofgem to say who is the supplier, and then you would say it's powered by Octopus Energy. But the London Power branding, the London Power McCaw, you know, all of those talks about London Power, not Octopus. So it's very distinct from all the other energy companies out there. And it's much better value, we would say.
Message hasn't gone out to their telesales people then. I've
Simply
repeated you the anecdote, do you know, that unless the Octopus person was pressed, did not say it was London Power.
We will follow up. Thank you very much for that point, I think, and we will definitely follow up.
Assembly Member Arnold, did you want to?
Are you able to say what the share breakdown is? So in terms of the London Power as a body, what's the GLA share in terms of investment? Is it 51%?
So it doesn't quite work like that. So what we've entered into is a contract for service, which you know, just like any other standard contract. And what we've done is negotiate a price with them, which we have enshrined in a contract, and that's what we monitor. So it's not like we've taken, you know, created a new company. This is a white label scheme where we partnered with an existing company, so we don't hold shares in Octopus.
But you don't share. But Octopus is in receipt of finance from the GLA, and therefore is subject to GLA scrutiny.
As would any contract that the GLA enters into, but where there is a commercial in confidence section, then there are things that wouldn't be made public. But if there is particular information that the Assembly members want, then please do write to me, and we'll see what we're able to do on a case-by-case basis.
It's just to speak to my colleague through you, Chair, and just to assure anybody listening, we have met this before. I can't remember which contract it was. 20 years is a long time. But we were able to get around it. So I do think that one of the things for me about scrutiny is if the question is raised, then it must be answered. Otherwise, it just hangs there.
Well, it hasn't.
Right,
as
it
far as
just
I'm
hangs
concerned,
there.
it hasn't been answered.
So
I
I would just ask you, Chair, that you pick that up, and that there should be a resolution in terms of the Assembly members' concerns, and for me, in terms of how we, the Assembly, can scrutinise the GLA investment in London Power. It might not be Environment Committee, it might be oversight. But there cannot be an answer of no to how the Assembly tracks GLA money. We have to find a way around that.
Absolutely, but just to be absolutely sure, I'm not saying no. What I'm saying is please write to me with your request, and we will see what we're able to provide, respecting the commercial confidentiality of the company.
Yeah. I think what we need is a sort of is an assurance of, are you is take up where you're hoping? Is it kind of where you feared, or is it even worse than your worst case scenarios beforehand? And I think there may be a way that you may be able to share some information with us, so that it doesn't come as a shock in a year's time if things are not as good as even your worst case modelling.
So with the caveat that, for an energy company, as Aram has said, it requires a full year before you're able to tell whether the scenario that you had painted, or scenarios, where are you against those scenarios. The big switching period is usually in the winter. We miss that because of the general election. So, we're
Until after 6.
Yes.
So who knows? And also lots of other things taken into account.
Yes. Now, you've said previously that you were going to be developing metrics to measure the success of London Power, and that you would share them with the committee. So when should we expect to see those metrics for success? And is there a reason that the success metrics weren't developed before the company launched?
Well, we have success metrics in that, the service level agreements that we have set have a number of metrics that we're monitoring the performance of the company against. So the internal governance mechanisms are looking at that and monitoring that regularly. So we do have success metrics. Do we have success metrics that are public? Well, I think it refers to the last question, which is what are we able to make public when it relates to a commercial enterprise. So as I've said, we're very happy to take that away and let you know when and what we're able to do. But if you've got a very specific issue that you're after, then let us know, and then I can follow that up with colleagues.
Nikki.
One of the things I think is very encouraging about London Power is the fact that it's going to be very stable in terms of the price, not rising, for people on prepayment meters. And I wonder what sort of, and also for people who are fuel poor, how much are you targeting your social media, well, it wouldn't be not necessarily social media, but anyway, the marketing and the information at those particular households?
It's a slightly different route, because what we've decided would be a better route would be to work with the boroughs and the G15 housing associations, where the housing stock is more likely to have people who are on prepayment meters, who are more likely to be those in fuel poverty. Also, the boroughs and the housing associations are more likely to know, of their tenants or residents who, where there might be people who are in fuel poverty, either because they are being referred to their own services, or they have direct contact with them. So we're able to then talk to the boroughs and say, here's material about an offer that we have, and many of those boroughs, I think at least 10, have signed up to work with us. And I know Assemblymember Tom Copley, the soon-to-be Deputy Mayor for Housing, has talked to the G15 about the same issue. So it's a slightly different route to advertising, the sort of marketing on social media, which could get to them, but isn't specific, isn't particularly targeted.
Will they monitor it?
Who?
The G15, I mean, the boroughs and the G15.
The boroughs and G15. Well, I guess
How
so.
can they do it? Because they're the people who are doing the marketing. But who's going to monitor the take-up?
And I think that's what we want to know is get the numbers that they manage to get access, and the numbers that we that will then come back to London Power. I don't know if you've got any more specific information.
No, I mean, as part of our overall kind of dashboard of performance, we're looking at a number of different windows of performance, some of it about broad scale take-up and some of it specifically about social housing, for example, through the Void system, or social housing more broadly. So it's on kind of an overall global dashboard that we look at and use to manage performance.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to move on to look at energy efficiency. Now, according to the one-year-on report for the London Environment Strategy, the current pipeline of potential investments for the £500 million of the Mayor's Energy Efficiency Fund add up to about £193 million. Is this in line with expectations? And do you anticipate all the projects in that pipeline to go through to completion?
My understanding is yes, it's on track, and if all that pipeline comes to fruition, but inevitably with projects, there is occasional things that happen that things don't go ahead or some things go faster than others. So we're about, I think, halfway through, and we've done very well in terms of the sort of allocation, the commitments of funding. The fund manager has done a great job in leveraging more money in over the amount of ERDF money that we secured and match funded by the GLA, which is great. That £500 million of financing is nowhere near enough what we need in London to implement energy efficiency and renewables projects. So, but it's a really good showcase for what can be done, and using that as a springboard for some of the other work that we want to do on growing the green finance work stream in London. Mm-hmm. Have you got any specifics, I think? Because we've funded 2 projects that are already out there, I think.
Yeah, £30 million has been committed to date, and about half of the overall budget is accounted for in terms of the pipeline. But of course, in development pipelines, it would be natural for some of that to fall away through the process. So we're 18 months in, and I see no reason why we can't get close to, or spend everything in the fund.
Mm-hmm. So are you developing more programs?
Absolutely.
In order to have enough.
Yeah.
Okay. And then in terms of the Mayor's green finance work stream, what has been made? Progress has been made through that. Sort of in addition to the Mayor's Energy Efficiency Fund, on identifying independent finance schemes to roll out after the Mayor's in terms of the Mayor's zero carbon ambitions.
This was sort of a key part of the environment strategy because, as we said, the amount of finance that we need in London to become zero carbon is huge. And we can't fund it alone through the GLA. We need private sector finance to be flowing. So whilst we're able to leverage a bit of money through establishing the Mayor's Energy Efficiency Fund, we need much more. So there are a couple of things that we've done. One is to ask the London Sustainable Development Commission to examine this, and they reported a couple of weeks ago, making a number of recommendations on how we can use public sector funding to drive private sector investment, and made a number of recommendations on how that might be taken forward, and the Mayor is looking at how we might do that. So that's part of the Green New Deal funding, is about how we might explore where next with that. We've done quite a lot of mapping. We've done our own work, which is the direct funding that we have provided through the GLA. We've been working to lobby government to make the case for our fair share of funding. We talked about earlier about how accessing the funding for London is where we've been barred from, is really making the case why this would help the UK. But the sort of order of finance that's needed to support us is really going to be down to the government and private sector working with us to do that. So I think the next steps, I think, is through the Green New Deal funding, is to examine those sort of mechanisms. We've been talking to the Corporation of London, for example. We've been talking to boroughs about their offset funding, using every lever we can to make sure that any finance that's out there is being levered and pooled into supporting our work.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Then, so the Mayor's Environment Strategy suggests that there's about 15% of London's energy could be met by decentralised energy schemes. So what percentage of supply is being contributed currently by the Mayor's current decentralised energy programmes?
I'm not sure I know that in percentages, unless either of you do.
what about in terms of a little, a bit, a lot?
So, well, we've been working on a number of projects to move our work on decentralised energy. So work, for example, on district heating networks, the solar projects that we've been developing in London, you know, as part of the Solar Action Plan, that has taken a number of steps forward.
And perhaps is there anything, you know, that's being done specifically to help kind of realise the potential of decentralised energy to help meet our energy requirements?
So I will write to you with a number. Sorry, I just can't find it in my papers. But on the decentralised energy programme, for example, we've been working on a number of projects to highlight the need to develop heat networks, for example. So we have a number of areas. One is the London Plan. We've set the policy requiring new development to make sure that they have the infrastructure to connect up to heat networks or to provide heat network infrastructure up to their boundaries so that we can connect up across London. We have our own project that is partly funded through EU funding, DEEP, which has been working with a series of projects pipeline, working with boroughs and so on.
Is that EU funding presumably coming to an end?
It is, but we've secured enough to be going on with for the next few years, and then government have said that they will then replace EU funding. So I think in yesterday's budget they talked about a number of confirmation on heat network funding and support, which we would hope that we would then get access to support the work that we've been doing in London. We've done a lot of mapping of where heat networks need to be. We've been working with some of our energy from waste companies to make sure that we start to capture the heat offtake. You know, we've been supporting projects like Bun Hill, where we opened phase 2 the other day with London Borough of Islington, where that's both capturing waste heat from the tube, which was going to heat homes and businesses in the area, but also is going to be able to use to cool the tube. And sort of projects like that. So a whole number of projects around decentralised energy. We've been working on solar, for example, mapping the potential for solar across London. We've been doing a reverse auction, so people who want to put solar panels on their roofs, and this has been a huge success. A reverse auction, we've run 3 now. I think over 800 units now are in. Where people have seen, you know, the first auction saw a 35% reduction in the installation price, slightly lower reductions later, sort of in the order of 20%. But it shows the appetite for people who want to implement renewable energy. And then, of course, we've been working with some of the functional bodies to make sure that we understand the potential for renewables on their estate, and as well as here at City Hall, we've been, you know, purchasing green energy as well, so driving the sort of potential for renewables across London.
I hope you're also pushing TfL to do a bit better on their 0.01% of renewable energy, which is their current use of renewables. I've got one final question.
So actually, I think Pete has some data.
There's a number of things I think I'll come back to you on if that's okay. Afterwards, but I was just going to focus on the new development in the London Plan. So in 2018, for example, the policies of the Mayor have driven 7 million in solar PV panels. That's 5.5 megawatts just from the planning policies in the plan.
Thank you. Lynnie, do you want to come in, or you're about to be coming in anyway? So
no, it's on a different.
Okay.
It's on a
Yeah.
different. It's about energy again. Sorry.
Yeah.
It was just about the London Community Energy Fund,
Yes.
and obviously there's been 3 rounds of that now, and that's been quite successful because it's focused on helping people over the line by offering assistance with sort of feasibilities and the things you need to do at the start. But obviously, when the Mayor was first elected in 2016, the arrangements for supporting people through feed-in tariffs was different, and it's all become a lot more difficult. So how successful do you think it's been so far over the 4 years, particularly given all these cuts from the government? And what options have you assessed for either extending the London Community Energy Fund or replacing it with something new that doesn't just cover feasibilities?
So the London Community Energy Fund has worked extremely well. As you pointed out, Lynnie, we were approached by community energy groups when the government took away the Urban Community Energy Fund, the national funding, saying, look, we really need help to make the business case to financiers, investors. That's where we need the support. And at that point, the FITs were around, so the business case was slightly easier. And over time, we've seen, I think, over 40 projects now in, some fantastic projects with solar panels on schools, on GP surgeries and so on. So really great ones. And I think we just announced the last round a few months ago, the last round of projects. So we would be very keen, and I think this is another one of the criteria that we've identified as potential for the Green New Deal funding, because it is such a local action that really speaks volumes and really signifies and shows and inspires people about the transition to a net zero world, and it's something that people can really see, in their daily lives, making a real difference. I met with the Minister Kwasi Kwarteng, on Tuesday, where I raised the issue around the Urban Community Energy Fund and saying that it was really important that was reinstated, that obviously the Mayor had stepped in to make sure this kept going in London, but really we need this nationally because, especially in urban centres, big renewables, wind, offshore wind and even onshore wind, they're not suitable for urban areas. And the things that we are able to do through the planning system or through the reverse auctions and so on, or through community energy projects, is small-scale solar. And we need both small-scale solar as well as the larger renewables to really combine to make us have a chance of getting to that net zero target. The budget, I don't think, came up with anything on community energy, so we will keep pressing, and obviously we'll bear that in mind as we go into the next administration, as to how we might support the community energy sector.
Okay, but that sounds promising that it might be considered for being part of the Green New Deal. So I think it is very popular, and actually at this point maybe I should do a declaration of interest because I'm involved, but I get nothing pecuniary from CREW, Community Renewable Energy Wandsworth, but they have been working obviously in this area fairly extensively, including working with the GLA. So maybe I should do that as an additional declaration.
Thank you.
That's a question, Caroline.
Yes, Nikki.
Yes, so many of the projects that we're talking about and that we're going to talk about need investment. We keep talking about investment. And I was very recently, something that you were speaking at too, which was the London Sustainable Development Commission launching a report on how we could move towards a future financing facility for London, so that we can unlock the investment that's there, that you talked about, that's there in the private sector, in order to fund a sort of confidently a pipeline of projects, so that we have confidence in developing that pipeline of projects because we know the investment's there. And I just wondered, I think the GLA and yourself have been working very closely with the London Sustainable Development Commission, and both of you working very closely with is it called the Green
Finance Institute?
Green Finance Institute, that the Corporation of London, City of London set up. Now, could you just tell us what progress there is on this?
So, as I mentioned it slightly earlier, the Commission have published its report with a number of recommendations, so we're now reviewing that. We've had conversations with the Green Finance Institute on how we might take this forward, along with a number of other actors in this area, with private sector investors, banks, pension funds, and so on. So there's a sort of mapping exercise that we need to pull together, which is again part of the feature of the Green New Deal Fund, is how we might pull all these sources of financing together. So some of this financing is going to be great for the big projects like the hospital retrofits and so on, but for small scale solar and community solar, they are so small scale that they just wouldn't be things that the Corporation of London sort of investors over the river would get out of bed for, I guess. So part of the problem in financing projects is how you agglomerate the project to a sufficient scale that would then make them investable. So what we might need to do is sort of separate those out, and the small scale solars, the smaller projects, what the Community Energy Fund have done amazingly well is get crowdfunding or get people investing in them because they've got such a good rate of return, and looking at how we might look at financial models that support that, which are very different to the financial models that you need for investing in big renewables that will support London, from offshore wind or solar solar farms sort of outside London, sort of supporting London's power. I don't know if there's anything that you want to add.
Okay, I understand that. I just thought it was important that the committee was made aware of that
Yeah,
work.
no, it's a really important part about accelerating the pace of change, and it's one that will probably feature as a big issue at the Conference of Parties COP in Glasgow later this year. This isn't an issue that London is facing alone. Everywhere is facing, other cities, but and it's a developed and developing world issue about how do you get those finance flows moving fast.
Thank you. You mentioned earlier the local planning authority offset funds, and apart from the sort of slight anxiety about the potential for developers to sort of avoid having to build new homes to the proper zero carbon standard, so you end up having to retrofit new homes in the future. But so leaving that anxiety about those funds aside, what kinds of projects are being supported through these local planning authority offset funds, and at what sort of scale?
It's quite a new initiative, the offset funding. So, over the last few years, we've been monitoring, surveying boroughs as to have they set up the scheme, to collect the funding. There's a time lag in between the development and the payment. And the local authority collecting the payment and then collecting enough funds to then use it in a way that is strategic rather than piecemeal. But we're really pleased that over time, certainly since I've been here, we've seen significant progress in boroughs, local planning authorities setting up the funds. So we have 31 that are underway, either collecting already or have started, got the mechanism in place to collect. So that's pretty much all of them. Over 50 million has been collected or secured for collection to date, and that's been ring-fenced for spending on carbon-saving projects in London. Whilst the expenditure is low at the moment, and the report talked about 2.8 million being spent by 7 local planning authorities, about 25% of the funds collected since October 2016. There are some very good reasons for this, from they're waiting to collect enough money to fund some really big, large-scale projects, and as I mentioned, the time lag. But the recommendation from the last report that we published, I think, late last year, was that really boroughs should not be holding these funds. These aren't. This isn't an ongoing income stream, because, as you pointed out, Caroline, what we want is the homes to be built at the higher zero carbon level. So the offset is only if you can't do the final bit. And officers here and in the boroughs will be pushing developers to make sure that the amount of offsets are limited. That should be the aim. So which means over time, we'll have got those zero carbon homes, we won't have that offset funding going further, and that's certainly if the Mayor has his way. And we'll be monitoring this again. We'll be doing another survey shortly, which will be asking boroughs what have they done with the funding. And to date, the sort of projects they're funding are things like solar panels on schools, funding, I think, what else have they funded?
Social housing and their own estate.
Yeah. And schools' energy retrofit programs as well. So some good projects starting out there. And again, this is something that we flagged with boroughs at the climate emergency workshop that we hosted, was, how might they use it to help deliver in their own boroughs, but, starting to think about, is there a way that we might pull some of that money in order to, to leverage that money to get an even bigger benefit, which goes back to the green finance work stream that we've been talking about. The London Financing Facility, the Sustainable Development Commission report talked about the pooling of carbon offset funds in order to leverage in even more funding. So lots of potential there.
Yeah. But actually, it's a fund that you kind of hope that the carbon offset fund
diminishes
over time, exactly,
no, the
because
ambition,
people are doing the right job in the first place.
So the zero carbon home standard, if it works right and well, and it is doing in London, and we're tightening it and ramping up all the time, is really getting what we want, was really good zero carbon homes, coupled with the decarbonisation of the grid. The worry is that the government is consulting on a future home standard, which will mean that our standard becomes isn't allowed to ramp up and show the ambition that we want to show and keep pushing developers who are delivering in London and are happy to deliver on that, because they too share those aspirations of getting good homes that are, aren't leaky, that reduce bills, that are pleasant to live in, and so on. So that's a big lobbying ask that we and a number of Metro mayors have made jointly with Sadiq of government, not to set standards that become a ceiling. They should be a floor, and then allow us the freedom to innovate.
Great, thank you very much indeed. Leonie,
before you leave the topic,
sorry.
Please, right at the beginning, Deputy Mayor, you told us how wonderful the Mayor was in delivering all his targets and how wonderful we all were and so on. Mm-hmm. I'd like to ask you a question on this one.
Don't make me regret that.
I'd like to ask you a question on this wonderfulness.
You're right.
On the, which relates to the Mayor's target of making London carbon neutral by 2030. Mm-hmm. And my understanding is that in part rests on replacing the more than 1.5 billion, beg its pardon, 1.5 million gas boilers there are in London. And I wonder whether or not you think it is realistic that you will be able to replace these 1.5 million gas boilers by 2030. I'm sure you're expecting this question because I'm asking it in the light of the memo which you allegedly received, which told you this was impossible.
The advice we were given, it was difficult, and this is a target. Replacing those boilers and changing to zero carbon or low carbon forms of heat will require the government to help us do this. And I think that's what the report also pointed out, was there are a number of issues that the government is going to have to help us with, from whether it's replacing gas boilers or decarbonising transport or decarbonising other parts of the energy system. We have set out in the 1.5 degree plan what we're able to do with the powers that we have, and that's the programs that we've started. So I've talked a little bit about the retrofit accelerator programs that we've implemented. There is no, it is absolutely clear that in order to get to that 2030 target, we're going to need government help and action and funding. And we ought to, and I think that the point of that, setting that 2030 target, is to show the leadership and ambition that is needed because of the crisis that we're facing. To wait until 2050 or to set a pathway to 2050 and hope that will get us to where we're needed, when it's absolutely clear that every day pretty much we're getting evidence from climate scientists and from others about the impacts that we're facing, means that we really should be showing the leadership. And if we fail to meet the target because of lack of ambition, then future generations are not going to thank us. We have to show the ambition and the leadership now.
Do you know that's all very weak spin, because what is happening is, and it happened with all the pledges which the Mayor made before the last election, was that effectively he was going to be able to do all of these things. When he's failed to do any of these things, he's alibied himself by saying, well, I don't actually have the power to do this. I need the help of the government. It's a variation of his... the reason that so many people are being murdered in this city is because the police aren't being properly funded by the government. So it's not his fault. It's somebody else. It's somebody else's fault. And now we are hearing. Now we are. No, it's part of a pattern. Madam Chairman,
make your point and ask your question.
His central pledge of making London carbon neutral by 2030. He knows he can't do it on his own. But he's making the pledge that this is something that he wants to do. But when we dig deeply into it, and actually I'm only dealing with it at skin-deep level by asking you about it, you say, well, what he's really saying is he'd like to do it by 2030, but he knows he can't do it without the government. Well, the truth of the matter is he can make any promise he likes, and he can say, the only reason that I'm going to fail to achieve this is because the government didn't help me, because Mr. Trump didn't help me, because a miracle didn't occur. Don't you think it would be far more honest,
Tony, can
Deputy
you get
Mayor,
this to a question?
in your pledges on the environment, and I stick to this one about making London carbon neutral by 2030, wouldn't it be more honest if the pledge was, I will make London carbon neutral only if I have the help of the government, rather than simply saying, and I've got the thing in front of me, saying, I will make London carbon neutral by 2030. Wouldn't that be the honest environmental strategy of this authority?
We have made it absolutely clear in the environment strategy and in the 1.5 degree plan, and in fact a number of other strategies, that the Mayor has the highest ambition for London and Londoners, and he's been really clear about where his powers lie and where the sources of emissions and where other people's powers lie that are able to help. And where he has the powers, he set targets that he is able to meet, and he's meeting them. If you take air quality, for example, and I know we're going to talk about that later, but this is, you know, exactly an area where we've set high ambition and delivered a significant impact. And I think the point is, if you don't set the ambition, then people won't try to meet as much as we can do. And if we're waiting for the government to help us, as we have been on air quality, we wouldn't have been able to deliver the fantastic reductions you're seeing on NOx, reducing the numbers of people that are exposed to toxic air pollution every day, reducing the cost to the NHS, reducing the burden of disease on the NHS and to people. You know, you really do underestimate the power of leadership, which people are crying out for.
No, the Mayor overestimates his power, and he portrays to Londoners
Tony,
that it's in his gift. It is not in his gift.
Tony, I'm sorry, you're now just giving opinions rather than asking.
The Deputy Mayor has done exactly the same when she's going on about the health service.
Every single target every single major target that we put forward, by this, we are within spheres of government, national government, local government, and we can't deliver very much on our own. But you set ambitious targets, and then you work with the other players, all the stakeholders, but particularly the other spheres of government to achieve it. And I think you're being grossly unfair.
Committee, can I please ask you all to be quiet now? I would just like to...
Excuse me, I wasn't...
No, I know you weren't, Jeanette. I didn't include you in that. I'm so sorry. I should... But could everyone, can we please move on? I would just like to say I'm very glad that the Mayor is now talking about 2030, because there was a while after we asked him to declare a climate emergency when he wasn't talking about 2030. So seeing that increased ambition is extremely welcome. I would like us to move on to some questions which will be asked by Assembly Member Cooper on building resilience in the capital.
Thank you, Chair. But just before I do, I'd just like to mention that when I first was elected here in May 2016, I spoke to the scrutiny team and said I'd like to do something through the Environment Committee, because I'd just become the chair of the committee at that point, on single-use plastic water bottles. I was laughed at by the scrutiny team. Eventually they said, you can have one meeting in February 2017, so that was almost a whole year later. We launched a report in April 2017, but in the lead up to that report, Assemblymember Arbour poo-pooed the discussion and said, shouldn't we be talking about plastic milk bottles and a number of other items? But it was a very targeted report that only talked about single-use plastic water bottles. As a result of that report, the Mayor then decided that he was going to move on the issue of single-use plastic, and the Environment and Energy team has had regular discussions.
And this isn't electioneering.
No, it's not electioneering.
No.
This is the development of policy and stepping up. And I think that some of the pressure that then came from the team here in the building on Michael Gove, who was the Secretary of State for Environment, who then started talking. Now, of course, it was all massively assisted by the publicity that came from the Blue Planet programme, which then led the Mayor to massively increase the budget again. But I think, you know, we started from something that people laughed at in 2016-17, and now I think the plague of single-use plastic and what it's done to the whole of the world is now very well known to everybody. So I think on this particular issue, Tony, you are wrong.
Oh, Assembly Member Cooper, I think we are not talking I thought you were making a broad policy point and not making a point with political implications. So could you stick to policy, please, and move on to your
There are
questions?
issues where we start and we can move forward, and sometimes it looks as though you can't, and you have to persuade everyone else to follow. I want to talk about something completely different, though, which is about actually it came up last night at the People's Question Time, the road runoff water quality study, which was published in December at the end of last year, which noted that only one of London's 41 riverways is classified as good. 3 are bad and 5 are poor, which is not a very good state of affairs. How is the Mayor and how is your team using the data from this study to meet the environment strategy objective, which is to improve the water quality of all of London's rivers?
Thank you, Leonie. That was the first time anybody's ever really looked at road runoff. So, it's a sort of pioneering study in the UK. I don't think anybody else has done it, globally. And we worked very closely with Thames 21, a charity, the Rivers Charity, and the Environment Agency on this. So I just want to sort of just thank them for their work. And that project really highlighted something that wasn't known, which was how much that road runoff really can pollute water sources. And we looked at Outer London because that's, most of the road runoff in central London will go into the drains and the sewers. So Outer London is where it affects watercourses. And that,
yes, I think we had a guess that it might be of this nature.
Yeah.
Because I can remember, I think it was Elliot and yourself came and talked about the study before it had been completed, and it was a concern. But at that point, no one had quantified it.
That's right. So it's been quantified, and we know where the sort of high-level locations are, and they're mostly on the sort of major roads. The sort of the Highways Agency roads and some of the big TfL-owned roads as well. So to your question is what next? So having got the sort of broad locations, what we're now doing is a phase 2 project, which is currently underway and reporting later this spring, is devising a sort of support tool for decision makers, Highways Agency, TfL, local authorities where these roads run through, which will then identify the best sort of treatment methods for the road runoff and what type of sustainable urban drainage mechanism or scheme might help, whether it's sort of wetlands or it's some other intervention that might help reduce that road runoff into those river courses. And then we'll be talking to those authorities, those highway authorities, to take that forward, and also working with with other cities and other Highways Agency authorities as well to take this forward as well.
So I've got 2 questions that I'd like to follow up from that. One is, do we have any knowledge about what vegetation or installations that you might include in SUDS that is particularly effective at cleaning the water that might go through of the toxins that have been established? And the second point, so that's a sort of mitigation thing, the second one is about the introduction of the London-wide low emission zone for heavy goods vehicles. Now, I'm sure that not all of the material that's getting into the runoff comes from heavy goods vehicles, but I would have thought the introduction of the low emission zone for the heavy goods vehicles might have some impact. So again, a sort of an overall reduction. And I just wondered if you could comment on both of those points.
On the latter point, the low emission, a part of the road runoff comes from tyre and brake wear. So whilst the low emission zone will tighten up the standard from air quality, it's really around the driving behaviour and the composition of the tyres that governs the sort of the abrasion of the tyres and then the particles that then get mixed up with the dust and the oil and so on. So it's less of a low emission zone issue, but I think it's definitely an issue for tyre manufacturers. And I know there's been a challenge about how do tyre manufacturers start thinking about the composition of their tyres so that it doesn't abrade so easily, and how do we talk to drivers of HGV vehicles to drive less harshly And then as you start to move to more
So this is
hydrogen,
another example of an extended producer responsibility,
Well,
isn't
indeed.
it, really?
Yes.
Just as we'd like the producers of plastic, for example, which I've hardly mentioned so far today, to take some extended producer responsibility for the kind of plastics that they're producing. So again, the tyres and the tyre manufacturers, if they take proper extended producer responsibility for the tyres that they're producing, that would also really mitigate this. Do you think 20 mile an hour zones would have more impact than the LEZ then? Because that impacts on driver behaviour quite
well, it does, but
massively.
obviously, a 20 mile per hour zone on some of the sort of arterial roads wouldn't necessarily work. But I think your point about it's about the ownership of the the tyre manufacturers, I think is key, and obviously, and we know obviously that contributes to PM 2.5, which is an air quality problem that we also need to deal with. So for those manufacturers to take responsibility would help on a number of other areas. I think on do we know the types of vegetation, the types of schemes that would really help alleviate runoff? I think we probably know a little bit, but
I mean, I can just
Andrew can help.
obviously reed beds have been traditionally used as a vegetation that's and tried and tested means of helping with improving water quality. Obviously, there's the issue about where you can create reed beds and the size of those sort of things, but that's from my knowledge they can work, and we've been involved in some of the greening schemes in terms of where we've been deculverting rivers, and they've been used where there's been misconnection sort of things that are difficult to solve by using reed beds as a means to filter that water when those rivers become open again. So
I went to visit Furze Farm up in Enfield, and that seemed to be a very good scheme that was showing the efficacy of the reed beds along what had previously been quite a dirty watercourse, and it had been the installation was as a result of Environment Agency intervention because there had been some misconnections and some flooding there. So, well, it sounds like we might end up with some very nice roadsides.
I hope so, and I think just to comment that the boroughs are very keen on this. We've run a couple of workshops now, which have been really well attended by borough highway officers who are very keen on understanding what the problem is and how the design of sort of road schemes or retrofitting road schemes might be able to help. And obviously we've through the Greener City Fund have made some funding available to support Greening the Grey, which has been more sort of community space projects, but we're looking to see how those highway authorities can also take this on by integrating these approaches into the design of road schemes going forward.
So that sort of brings me on to the next area, which is flows from the London Sustainable Drainage Action Plan, which suggests that funding pressures do make it particularly difficult to fund these large-scale drainage improvements. So you just mentioned the Green New Deal as a possible source of finance. So the Mayor's Green Finance Workstream is exploring funding options beyond the Green New Deal for large-scale sustainable drainage retrofit. I know that the Environment Agency, as I just mentioned, will fund them from time to time.
Yeah, and I think, it's both the Environment Agency and some of the water companies are going to be huge sources of support in this area. And, some of them have been doing some very good work, but I think, as ever, it's once you understand the problem, then it's about, well, how can you help on this? So we talked about the road runoff project. It was a project through the Water Advisory Group, which I chair, which brings together a number of the water companies that operate in London, as well as the regulator, as well as Environment Agency, Thames 21, and the Consumer Council for Water. So they all come together, and this was a key project. So we're due to have a Water Advisory Group, I think, next week, where we'll be taking the study back to say, well, here it is. We've done the study to understand what the problem is. We now know what the problem is. We'll have a finer grain understanding of that through the next phase of it. But really, it's about how are you helping to support the implementation of this. So that is the next step, about getting some of those bigger organisations who have the wherewithal to help support this approach to step up.
Now, one thing that exacerbates the level of runoff is the rather ubiquitous practice of paving over of people's driveways. And people are still doing this in areas of high flood risk. How is the GLA engaging with the boroughs to ensure that they are aware of this? And are they using any powers as yet to try and prevent it? I mean, I think it's deplorable and should be banned, personally, but that's just a personal thing.
It is a borough responsibility. I don't know so much about it. I don't know whether anybody else has anything specific to say, but, from dragging, back to sort of previous previous roles, it is about sort of it's partly about getting people to understand the importance of making sure that your paving over your front garden, you know, is not going to help road runoff. It's not going to help, you know, flash flooding. It's going to exacerbate it essentially, and often you need permission to cross over, and people aren't aware of that. So these are things that that I think the boroughs are aware of. I know London councils have talked to local authorities about how they might help with that. But I think, you know, we talk about climate emergencies. People are getting to understand that by greening the grey, it will help reduce that surface water flooding. It will help biodiversity. And just the sort of, you know, the general visual appeal of an area.
Just to add to that, so we talked about training and the toolkits. We've also been working with Groundwork on producing guidance on depaving and funding schemes, locally, community schemes. And I think one positive from the budget announcement yesterday was 5.2 billion for flood defences, and I think it would be interesting to explore how we can capture some of that money for SUDs in urban areas.
Yeah. Nikki.
They're not, because the Assembly has been talking about this, and there have been conversations, many conversations over the last 20 years about, this is just about the paving over front gardens.
Yeah.
And it's perfectly possible to have permeable surfaces. It's perfectly possible to put gravel down or to put something between the blocks. Is there not something now in the London plan about the need for permeable surfaces, and not just in front gardens, but around all developments? Surely there is.
So to take out your front garden and if you propose to put a hard surface in, you require planning permission. So the permitted development rights to pave over your front garden, it's been in place for quite a while. So unless you put some permeable surfacing in there, you lose your permitted development rights. So therefore, you have to go to the borough and get planning permission.
So you have to get borough?
You have to go to the borough to get planning permission if you don't want to put permeable surfacing down.
Okay.
But the problem presumably is enforcement.
Yeah. But to what degree boroughs?
It'd be better to say everyone should have planning permission, then they can stipulate, yes, if it's permeable surfaces.
Yeah.
Still, the other thing I wanted to say is, it did come up recently in something, just as a side conversation, but why isn't TfL on its roads now and its pavements, why aren't we putting down permeable surfaces? Now this, especially on pavements, I'm a bit sort of, well, I'm not quite sure what I should say about roads. I mean, yesterday we heard, 28 billion going to be spent on tarmac throughout the country, and only 1 billion on clean vehicles. And I just do wonder why we can't have permeable tarmac. We know we've got the materials, we could do it. Are we not stipulating and working with TfL now, at the very least, and they can show the way, and then we can work with boroughs?
I'd have to take that back to TfL.
I think we have to take that back. I mean, I do, whether it be TfL, I do know some boroughs. I mean, obviously, there's when do you resurface, when are you doing some practical action to resurface your pavements? But I do know, for example, I've been to Barnet and seen some of the work they've been doing, where they've been doing trees, and in terms of putting permeable surfacing around street trees, and using that as an opportunity when they're either replacing or doing some tree maintenance to put in permeable paving on pavements.
Like everything, it's bound to be a bit more complex than I'm suggesting, because I'm sure there are utilities underneath, there'll be things underneath, but it seems to me that we could deal with a lot of the runoff issues and the flash flooding if we had much more stipulation around permeable surfaces.
Do you want to continue?
As well as vegetation, so that
yes,
the
of course, along with all the other things.
Is actually improved once it comes through. I just wanted to ask you a bit about some of the maps and tools that you've been publishing to help Londoners understand how green our city is, and also that are available for use by policymakers. How many people, do you keep a record of how many people have been accessing the tools, and how do you think you're going to develop them into the future? If you don't have that information to hand, I'm very happy for you to send that afterwards.
I know they're web-based tools. I presume there's a way of counting the number of hits on the website. So yeah. I think if we can write to you about that. And in terms of development of the tools, I think we're always keeping these things under review. Andrew can talk a little bit more about the range of tools that we have that has really helped understand in much more granular detail, for example, canopy cover, so that, and, you know, where our green spaces are, and overlaying that with, you know, so cross-referencing it with the sort of air pollution hotspots. You know, whilst the Mayor has made available Green City funding, you know, £30 million worth, that's obviously not going to be enough to deal with everything we want to do in London. So, you know, using those mapping tools to really target areas that really need help. So when we invite applications for the various Green City Fund funding streams, we ask and we use those mapping tools to help us understand, you know, how we might prioritise, you know, the funding applications we get, because we always get more than we have money for.
Right, so making sure they get targeted to the right place.
Yeah, and I don't know whether there's any new mapping that we're developing.
Just in terms of update, obviously it's citywide data, so it's about when there's new citywide data coming on stream. So, for example, the Environment Agency have produced data on nature-based solutions to flood risk, and that's a sort of new data set we would try and integrate into the focus map, which I think is the primary tool you're talking about in terms of, and so we keep constant track of when new citywide data is coming on board, whether it's appropriate for us to update the thing, and whether there is a new data set that we can incorporate into the system. I mean, in terms of how it's being used, I mean, Shirley indicated about we ask grantees to review it and look at it as and identify how their scheme may be addressing some of the challenges that we've identified in it. We're also doing a series of workshops on the urban greening factor with boroughs and developers. They're proving quite popular. We're doing those with UDL, and again, we will promote the focus map as a means to help, you know, when they're taking forward development, to look at the focus map as a means to inform.
Well, that's very good to hear, because the urban greening factor came from my rapporteurship, or at least in part came from that, where I called for the green space factor to be introduced along with net biodiversity gain. The other point I want, so it's good to hear that is all going forward and being used, but it would be good to have the numbers of hits on the website, because there might be something about advertising it further. One thing I think that has been a really good way of advertising that London is a green city, which you mentioned in your opening remarks, Shirley, is the whole issue of London declaring itself to be a national park city, and then having events and programming to actually get people out into nature, which I'm very passionate about. How do you think that is going to be developed to further increase engagement with Londoners? What else can be done?
In terms of the National Park City
programme of activities. I mean, do you feel that it's reached all the other parts of London that other programmes have not reached? She said, misquoting it.
No, but it's been a fantastic way of engaging Londoners. So the festival that we had last year to celebrate being confirmed and designated as a National Park City was a wonderful way of understanding and getting all Londoners involved. You know, different. I think what we're particularly proud of is that, you know, the reach that we had. So it wasn't just the sort of typical person who uses the park, but people who wouldn't necessarily go into a park or use a water course, you know, go out and try the river and understand, you know, what biodiversity was out there, go out into some of the fantastic open spaces that we have and finding new open spaces. So we are very keen to keep going on promoting the fantastic open spaces that we have in London, and particularly those hidden gems. And so we're working as part of the this year, which is the year obviously of COP and the climate change COP, but it's also the year of the Convention on the Biological Diversity later this year in China, and it really brings together the fact that we have a climate and an ecological emergency, and that we that we need to be tackling both of those together. And the National Park City is a way of really getting engaging Londoners, inspiring Londoners, and actually for them to inspire us in taking more and more action and faster action, as we talked about the 2030 target.
Now, you just brought together the National Park City and getting people into nature together with the climate emergency and COP. One of the things that has been much discussed, but does definitely appear in the London Environment Strategy, that the Mayor committed to increasing tree cover by 10% from current levels by 2050, although it's been much discussed that there are other figures attached to this. Is London on track to reach the target of a 10% increase in tree cover by 2050? And if yes, how much air pollution and carbon will be sequestered from London's air due to the tree planting programme? So I think it's 280,000 is the number that's been planted so far.
We planted over 280,000 trees to date in these last few years, so more than the previous mayor did in 2 years, as you've heard Sadiq say. So we're really proud of that, and I think, talking about the National Park City...
It's 2 million.
What he promised was a major tree planting programme, which he has
plant
delivered.
2 million trees in London in my first term as mayor.
We have involved a number of... I think what we're particularly proud of is getting Londoners involved and, talking about the climate emergency in action. We've had every borough taking advantage of the tree planting programmes that we have funded. Got all ages and people involved in tree planting. And it really shows that people want help to take action and, really want to help beautify the city, help tackle climate change and improve our air quality. In terms of the specific numbers that you're asking about the impact of those, I think we'll have to write back to you because I don't have them to hand.
Why should we believe him?
But we can do.
Obviously, that's quite an important metric because, just planting trees is lovely, but the fact that they are also part of the piece in terms of improving nature, but also improving air quality and mitigating climate impacts is very important to us as well.
Yeah, the potential for storing carbon is huge.
Given that, and although there is some dispute over what precisely the target was for the planting of trees, given that the mayor did set a target for the planting of trees, or at least an increase in canopy cover, why hasn't the mayor set targets for achieving green roof and green wall coverage in London? Because those clearly feature in the London plan. And what percentage of roofs are currently green in London, do we know? I'm happy to also include brown roofs in that, if they just happen to be brown but have nature on them.
Yeah, so there was a report published earlier this year by the Living Roofs Association, I think. 1.5 million square metres of green roofs in London, and I think we have one of the biggest percentages, I think, in...
So Central London now has more green
London.
roofs per inhabitant, Central London, than some of the other global cities. And, I mean, just as a fact from the work that we did, was undertaken, there was a 40% increase between 2016 and 2017 in terms of the area of green roofs. So there's this 1.1 million square metres of green roofs across the capital, 200 football pitches that's equivalent to. So, and obviously the urban greening factor is going to accelerate the increase in terms of the areas of green roofs as well. So I think it'd be quite difficult to place a area target on the area of green roofs you expect to achieve, given it is primarily driven by the scale of development and how that's...
Okay, so I mean, I accept the point that you're making, except that, a lot of the housing that, the mayor's got a huge budget for housing and a big target in the London plan per annum for the number of housing units that are going to be produced. And, nobody is expecting the Deputy Mayor for Housing to say, well, I don't really have a target for the number of units that we're going to produce because we're not directly producing them. So I'm not sure I entirely accept your argument that we couldn't have, some sort of aim. I mean, at the moment we're saying there's no metric, so we can't measure success or, in inverted commas, failure on this because we're not setting any kind of, level that we're expecting. I mean, we must know how many developments are likely to take place over the, there's got to be a sort of parameters for, let's say things go very intensively, there'll be this level of development, or it goes very slowly, it will be that level. If people are retrofitting buildings, you must have sort of an up and down parameter. So there must be some way of giving us a sort of a minimum and a maximum likelihood for the amount of green roofs and green walls. Otherwise, what's the point of having the urban greening factor?
I think, well, as Andrew said, I don't think you can do that. It all depends on economics. It depends on whether developers are ready to bring forward projects, whether the boroughs have given planning permissions. These all take time. So I think it's very difficult, as Andrew said, to set the target. But the urban greening factor then says when you do get the development, there is a benchmark which we then hold developers to account to maximise the amount of green infrastructure that goes into those streams, and on the basis of that going through, then we're able to report back on how well we're doing and are they meeting that benchmark, which is, I think, the best we can do at the moment. But I think going back to the leadership and setting the agenda, that the point that the Mayor has said, and the planning teams here and in the boroughs now, having to, take into account the new London plan, is that the highest ambition is for maximising the greening of infrastructure, incorporating into housing developments, as this committee's report has talked about, but bringing it into daily lives as far as possible. We talked about greening the grey. It's that sort of ambition that we want to see, and that's what the Mayor is helping to support.
So sitting alongside of that, we've been told throughout the London Plan process that a couple of SPGs, pieces of supplementary planning guidance, would be emerging, and I was told repeatedly, for example, that the All London Green Grid, which I see as an important tool in making sure that we are greening the grey. When is that due to be published?
So I think we said at the last committee that it was when the London Plan was formally signed off, adopted and so on. We are still waiting for government to indicate whether it has signed off the new London Plan. But the Mayor has committed to producing that SPG, and we will do as soon as we're able to.
So as soon as Robert Jenrick gets his act together and doesn't ask for another extension, you're saying that the All London Green Grid is going to come out at that point?
It won't come out at that point because I think it's in development, but it will come out soon after.
Very soon.
If SPGs have a statutory document, so they have to go through a statutory consultation period. And obviously there's a number of SPGs that have been committed to. They can't all come out at once, so it's got to be considered in where it is in terms of that package of SPGs that go with that. But we have done some preliminary work on it, and we need to do some soft consultation on it, I think, that we'd like to do as soon as possible. So it's certainly moving forward.
Also had the Greens
to keep the pace up, and also Nikki, did you want to come in? Yeah.
Just quickly, not so much on the SPG though. Do you want to finish that point? Was it finished?
I'm just very aware that we're still on our second section of questions, and we've got another whole 2 sections to come.
I'll be very quick. I wanted to just go back to the National Park City, because you linked, when you talked about it, you linked the climate emergency and the ecological emergency. I just wanted to say that last week the Assembly at the plenary came up with a motion which was unanimously agreed across all the parties, that about the green belt, which is 20% of London's, or 22% of London's green space. And part of its ask was that the Mayor would work with across all the teams, and regeneration, food, and all the different, as well as the environment and so on, but also across TfL, and in ways that could enhance the green belt. And I know that work's already going on with that, but it would be very good if National Park City was able to embrace the green belt as part of it, because millions of Londoners live very close to the green belt, and millions more could enjoy it if we worked with all our teams and maybe marketed it more, and TfL helped with marketing it and so on, taking people out there. So it was just a point to say it would be so great if in the future National Park City embraced the green belt too.
I think it already does. I think we absolutely see it's critical to London's green spaces and to Londoners. So I think we've been working on how, a number of programmes on how we might do more in the green belt, which hopefully come to fruition shortly. And we're looking to see what more we could do,
Brilliant.
Lily, your final
My final point is about the London Green Spaces Commission, which has now had all 6 of its planned or expected meetings.
Yeah.
When will we be able to see any initial findings from the piece of work that they've been undertaking?
So the team are working very hard on finalising the report. I think the issue is whether we're able to publish it before the pre-election period, because we're pretty down to the wire. But the Commission have been, and again paying tribute to their work, they are unpaid commissioners who've put a lot of effort in, have gone round to boroughs, had a number of workshops and seminars and conversations, taken evidence, come together with a great report with some good recommendations, which unfortunately I can't share just yet. But be absolutely sure that it's a big part of our approach of making London greener and supporting the boroughs in finding new business models and ways of supporting our parks and open spaces.
Okay, well, as you know, we've got just over a week, or it's
I
going to
know.
have to wait until after the 7th of May. But thank you very much for that update on where we are with that, and I look forward to seeing the report. Thank you, Chair.
Great, thank you. We're now going to take a very, very brief break
Right.
before the next people come and join the panel. So I'd just like to thank Andrew and Peter for your contributions, and we will take a break now, but literally just for a couple of minutes.
Okay.
Tony, reading my
How does the Mayor intend to reach a 50% recycling target for local authority collective waste that has been little growth in recycling this year? Yes, he is. Well, I tried, didn't I? Can't we clip some of that stuff, you know, about him saying, well, principally on the basis that he can only do it if the government
Against it.
in the line that is the not being governed now.
You've got 50%, and how are you going to reach it? Is that it?
That's right. That's right. The second one is, how does he propose to increase recycling rates given shortfalls in funding? Then how can he commit to a London-wide waste reduction target? There's loads of questions here, Nikki. And then what progress has been made with the approval of boroughs' reduction and recycling plans? What can the Mayor do to promote consistency in food and recycling waste? How can he increase the rate of recycling in flats? Nothing whatever to do with the decision. It was your law. Yeah. And it's not for me to defend you. But seriously, she
Last night?
No, just now. All the wonderful things he'd done.
I hadn't been warned that there was going to be a free. Yeah, no, that's something that needs to.
The only thing is, nobody's listening, so it doesn't
Yeah,
matter.
well, exactly. Look at our great big audience. Tony, don't disappear, because
No, I'm not. I shall come back.
very keen that we get this
I'll
meeting
stay here
going
for-
again.
I'll stay here for the call.
Thank you. I want to.
Bailey did your triumph yesterday.
You did very well.
I told her that it was the best one I've
Yeah,
been to.
yeah. Did you to me?
It was the best one you've ever
I've been to them all. It was largely, to be fair, down to the audience, who asked good questions, good questions. It was full, and you stopped a couple of the troublesome barriers.
Everyone got to the loo. I think I might want to.
And also, when I stopped the person who was trying to thank us as well, which made everyone laugh, and then we were able to refer back to that. There were a couple of people who.
To be fair, the Mayor dealt with them quite easily, didn't answer their questions, I thought. He just ignored them.
There were a couple of questions he didn't appear to engage with. But no, I wanted. I set myself 3 goals. One was to try and make sure the questions.
It's very nice to see you. We're just having a... Oh, no, do the bump. Oh, yes. So, Nikki, we're kicking off with yours. That's right. Oh, no. Oh, dear. And just to mention books and people some very interesting questions. Yes, the people are here. Hello. Yes, you doing waste and recycling? Absolutely. Yes. Well, Shirley's doing it, but you're here in case she needs. Yes. Okay, we have Shirley. Do we have 4 members? We do have 4 members. We can start again. Because we're starting with your section, Nikki, and Jeanette, I am sure, will be here any minute.
That's fine. She's not on to air quality though.
Okay, we'll just wait for...
Everyone here?
Almost. And just before I restart the recording, we are slightly up against it time-wise, so if everyone can keep up the pace, that would be good, because I don't want to keep everyone here till the end of ever.
Okay.
Till the end of time. Okay.
I'll be quick. I'll try.
Welcome back to this meeting of the London Assembly Environment Committee. Can I welcome 2 extra guests? We have Elliot Trahan, who is Head of Air Quality, and Andrew Dunwoody, who is Policy and Programme Manager for Green Infrastructure.
I think that's a mistake. It's for waste in the green economy.
Okay, brilliant. So can I ask Nikki Gavron to start with some questions?
So this is to the Deputy Mayor, Shirley. Just to kick off, you've set, what I think is a pretty reasonable target actually, of 50% of household waste, this whole section's about waste, to be collected by to be the rate, recycling rate by 2025, I think. Am I right?
Yeah.
50%. But in view of the fact that growth is looking pretty slow, how are you, what's going to happen? How are you doing? Are you going to meet that?
I think so. We have been working with the boroughs to make sure through the recycling plans that we maximise the amount of recycling that they are able to do. Our performance in London is the worst in the country, and although the rate is poor, we have seen a very slight increase, very small, so nothing to be proud about. But I guess it's not declining, which is something to be glad about. But the work that we've been doing through the boroughs has really, we've been pressing ambition with them and trying to get them to
I'm going to come on to talk about the work with the boroughs in a moment. So
but in terms
the short answer is you think you can do it?
I think we can do it again, and Tony's not going to like this, but we do need the government to help. We need, so just to be absolutely clear, that the mayor does not run waste management or recycling services in London, it's the local authorities. So the role we have is to make sure that they take the utmost ambition. We work with the local authorities through the London Waste and Recycling Board. We have best practice. We use the powers that the mayor does have, which is the power of direction to be used in extremis, but it's quite a weak power. To get boroughs to do more. Each of them are locked into contracts, so we've been working to
I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to ask about that in a minute. I just want to, so you need more help from government?
Well, we have said, and so have the local authorities said, that in order to do more on recycling, we need between 100 and 300 million pounds of funding for infrastructure to help get a standardised service across London and do more on separate food waste collection. We would need, we've asked for the funding for the landfill tax credit scheme to be devolved to London. Most of that money doesn't come to us, which would help partly fund that infrastructure. Ideally, we would like some changes, and we've seen some good progress on some of the consultations that government's come out on extended producer responsibility, plastic packaging and so on. And they have actually taken on some of the mayor's policies, for example, saying that food waste, anaerobic digestion, for example, both those areas are things that local authorities should be moving forwards on. We would like that to come in earlier than the government is talking about. So those are good things.
What is the government talking about in terms of...
So on food waste, it's 2022. 2023, and we've said that you should be bringing it as soon as you're able to through the contract changes, and a number of boroughs have contracts that they can change.
Okay, so what you're saying is that the government, there's more that the government could do. They could bring forward the food. What are they going to do to help food waste reduction?
Well, they're mandating that all boroughs collect food waste separately.
I see, but not till 2022.
Not till 2023.
2023. Okay, So what? Okay, I just
so
want.
There's also
what I just want to say is that I'm very struck by, because we were in Wandsworth last night. I looked up what Wandsworth was doing in terms of recycling. Wandsworth was.
That would have been fast.
Wandsworth was at a rate of 28% recycling in 2007. It's now at 22%, and it was higher than that, a little bit higher, and it's been going down ever since the Belvedere incinerator opened. And so has the whole of Western Riverside, which is 4 boroughs, I think, maybe 4 or 5 boroughs. They're all less. And I'm just wondering, and if you moved sideways to Sutton, Merton, Croydon and Kingston, you see that Kingston's at about 50%, the lowest of them, Merton, I think is at 39%. That was last year. Now, they're all so much higher. And why are they higher? Because they're not commingling. Because they're one of the reasons, they're source separating. And it's a combination of incineration and commingling. Now, what can the mayor do? I know you've got a moratorium on any further incineration capacity, but what about commingling? What can you do about that?
So
and encouraging the example of the South London Partnership, which is those 4 boroughs.
The policy asks for separate food waste collection because that helps take out the contamination. And it makes the recyclates that are left much higher quality and therefore more able to be recycled. And the food waste can then go to anaerobic digestion, which counts against our recycling targets, and is just much better all round. But ideally, I think there is a problem about the recycling rates changing because as we move to a more circular economy approach, they should, eventually over time reduce the recycling rates will change. But I think, that would be a great problem to have. We're a long way off that for now.
A long way off?
The circular economy really kicking in, I think. We're starting on that. We're doing some great work through the London Waste and Recycling Board. At the GLA, we've got some policies in the London Plan that is trying to promote circular economy approaches. That whole waste reduction agenda we've been pushing government to do, which they've taken on board, which they've said that they're going to take forward. So these are good starts, but for them to actually be implemented and to have an effect is going to take some time.
Going back to the commingling, which is clearly, if you look across London, is partly responsible for the fact that we are just dragging along in terms of our recycling levels. How many contracts are coming up and when, roughly?
We only have a few more contracts coming up. So because they're quite long contracts, they only come up every X number of years, 7, 10, 15 years. And over the next few years, we've probably got about 4. I've seen we've cleared about 13 contracts since 15.
Cleared about how many? Sorry.
15 since this administration. But they vary in size and type. You get very, very small contracts, very huge contracts around collection.
But when the contracts come up, it's an opportunity to look again at this whole concept of commingling, isn't it?
It is, but it's down to, the mayor's powers are really only before the specification goes out. So we're able to ask the local authorities to make sure that the specification is in general conformity with the mayor's strategy. But they also have to take their own circumstances into account as well. Andrew, is there anything that you want to say? No.
Yes, I just don't. I find it difficult to see how we're going to make progress unless we go to source-separated waste. How we're going to reach the higher target.
Where we take advice from is from the RAP, which is the government agency, who set out what the best practice is, and for some local authorities, it's depending on where they are in their infrastructure, it's source separated. In others, it's commingled because it's about what makes it easier to get the participation rate up from residents, and for some it's and you know, in some areas, you know, depending on space, you know, if you're in a block of town block or whatever, if you don't have the space to do source separated, then sometimes you can only go down the route of commingled, and then, you know, that might reduce the amount that you recycle, but you'd have to make that up in other ways. I mean, the other area that we want to work hard on is commercial waste, because commercial waste is very much like the household waste in terms of paper and so on, and increasingly we want them to be starting to collect food waste. Ideally, we would get government to mandate, you know, some form of sort of collection and recycling of commercial waste as well, which would then help boost recycling rates across London.
Yes. Am I right that your targets of 50%
household, local authority collected waste,
50% of waste to be recycled by 2025 and 65%
municipal by 2030?
Yes. Are these targets including, is it municipal waste? It's not just household waste, it's trade waste as well?
That's the 65%.
That's the 65%. The 50% is pure household waste by 2025?
Yeah.
Yes?
It's local authority collected waste, which is slightly different. I mean, it's a very complicated definition.
But that includes trade waste, doesn't it?
It includes trade waste that the local authority collect, which is usually from small businesses or other organisations such as schools or other public...
Sorry, can you get close to your mic?
Sorry, it includes any waste that the local authority actually collects. So that sometimes they do offer commercial services, and that's usually to small businesses that don't have the buying power to get involved with a larger waste contract, or other organisations such as schools and other institutions that require waste collections as well.
Okay, all right. Can I just talk about the flats for a minute, because you talked about that. How are you've got to, if you had some piloting flats?
We've just completed it. We launched it a couple of weeks ago. So it's a project looking at how you might increase the participation of the residents, and how you might reduce contamination, and how you might increase the recycling rates generally. You know, by tracking how people behave, they've monitored uptake in recycling rates, and it's very interesting. Often it's about design, how you make sure there are places, you know, are they clean, are they available, are the facilities, you know, where people are moving, rather than, you know, having to sort of, you leave your house and you have to go around the back of the block of flats, rather than it's on your way to the tube station. So simple design changes like that really have helped boost the recycling rates and the participation rates. So you know, it's been really helpful. Also things like how you sign the where the containers are, and where you put, you know, what you put into different bins, and how big the bins are, and so on. So there's been quite a lot of research and evidence, I think, through that's been really useful, and we're using that to as part of the recycling plan process and discussion with local authorities, pointing them to this advice and getting them to think about taking it up. Andrew?
Interesting, yes. Just going back to the food waste and looking at flats, there are 9 boroughs, aren't there, that don't at the moment collect food waste?
Yes, that's correct.
Yes, that's right. And very recently, the Labour group produced a report on food waste that was authored by Leonie Cooper. And in that it talked about the hundreds of thousands of tonnes of waste that could be collected from food waste. And I've just been looking at Milan, which the whole city now is collecting food waste from every single household.
Yeah.
And Milan is very dense and very flatted. And I'm just wondering if there are lessons to be learnt from Milan.
Yeah, and the researchers did go to Milan to look at what they're doing, but some of it was about, you know, desire lines and the signage, and some of it is cultural, some of it is behaviour change, that, you know, people learn, you know, to put your recycling out in the right bin, at the right time, you know, without contaminating it. And that is you know, a big part of, I think, a lot of things is the behaviour change issue. And on recycling, it's about how you get people to understand what they're required to do, when they're required to do it. So where we launched it was I think it was a Peabody estate, where we, Peabody, when they have a new tenant going in, or resident, they get a pack with some information about what is your recycling service, what do you expect to do, partly as a sort of contract between the housing association and the tenant, and, you know, it's sort of a social contract in effect about this is how, you know, a good neighbour behaves in dealing with the recycling, and also talking about the, you know, environmental impacts and so on. And they've got some simple mechanisms like putting bags to put your rubbish in as you're leaving the flat. There's a sort of roll of bags that you can put your rubbish in, so that if you forget to take something or it's there, then you can put it into the recycling bin.
Okay, and you talked about anaerobic digestion, because another recommendation from this report was that, of course, the more food waste we collect, the more renewable gas we can produce from anaerobic digestion. Yeah. And I'm just, how much are you pushing for it? Because it's perfectly possible, particularly in those large schemes referred to the Mayor, to get anaerobic digestion, you know, small anaerobic digestion plants per development. So that so it's a very good way of people understanding what's happening to their waste or their food waste, and actually seeing the connection between that and their power.
So
are you pushing for that?
Well, we're definitely saying that people should, you know, local authorities should be looking at anaerobic digestion as, you know, the best practical, best environmental option. I can't remember what it is, BPO. But I don't think it's in the London plan to, you know, to mandate that you should have smaller AD facilities within your development, because it's back down to how the local authorities dispose of their waste, which is, you know, sort of partly locked into some existing.
Yeah, the Assembly tried to get it into the London plan, but we did talk quite a lot about anaerobic digestion.
And there was probably good reasons why.
But it would be. I mean, it's not that difficult to do. I think the Haygate estate has done it, or they were considering doing it. What we need to find is examples of large estates, because it should help. It should help local authorities, shouldn't it?
I would take that back for Jules to see whether that's something we can do. But, you know, obviously it's not for the new London plan. It'd be for an iteration, I'd have believed. Yeah.
And that's, of course, not to knock out larger anaerobic digestion plants in other places.
I think that's important, because, you know, we don't have enough anaerobic digestion facilities, I think.
And then, just finally, on... oh, sorry. Go on.
Speedily.
Incredibly briefly, the report found that if we more successfully implemented anaerobic digestion, perhaps in the way that Nikki is just outlining, that we could power 75,000 dwellings in London. And given the climate emergency, is this not something that we should be trying to push ahead with more vigorously? And the anaerobic digestion I don't think does need to be linked to what the local authority is necessarily doing, providing the landlord or the large developer or whoever's managing the scheme afterwards is prepared to do some good engagement, because that's what they did in Milan to get people to change their behaviours. Would that be something that the Mayor's Green New Deal Fund could fund, that kind of engagement, to get people to actually use people to separate their food waste and use anaerobic digestion more effectively?
So there are a lot of calls on that Green New Deal Fund already just out of this meeting, so I wouldn't want to commit that as being another option for it. But I think what the work we're doing with boroughs, ourselves as the GLA, through the London Waste and Recycling Board, is talking about what are the ways of getting people engaged and recycling better, contaminating less, so we get better recyclers. How do we get anaerobic digestion facilities really pushed out there, and what we are able to do is through the food policy, the waste policy that's talking about separate collection of food waste, then enables the anaerobic digestion to be more economic, and we know that that's going to help with, you know, some of the sort of biogas powering vehicles as well as homes that we need.
Sure. Well,
to,
I just
to
think
get
if
to
you're
zero
doing the work
carbon.
on the heat networks, you might as well do the work on the transforming the gas networks. But I'm going to pass you back to Nikki. Apologies for
Yes.
coming in on that.
I want to come back now to the waste reduction and recycling targets that you're negotiating with boroughs.
Yeah.
And could you just tell us a bit more about how you're getting on with that?
So we have had very good discussions with the local authorities. So when we consulted on the environment strategy, one of the options was either the Mayor sets targets for the individual local authorities, and the other was that the local authorities would work with us to set their own targets, but taking account of the makeup of the borough, their level of performance, but also, crucially, what a modelled potential might be. And we have worked very closely with the local authorities, challenging them to understand and to get them to do more. I'm not able to tell you in detail where we've got to yet, because we're signing off all the individual rates and recycling plans with the individual local authorities, which we're going to be doing over the next few weeks. But it is very encouraging. It is still...
Can I just say, I mean, that 50%, is that... It's not for each borough, that's across London.
That's across London.
So that what you're doing with each, you're looking... So let's take Wandsworth,
yeah.
which is, the 5th worst in the country, and has gone down, because it's now sending it all to Belvedere, so clearly could do much better. So how are you getting on with them?
So I don't want to talk about individual boroughs
because... Oh, okay.
Well, because it would be unfair not to... Yeah, because we've not actually signed off the Wandsworth letter yet. So until we do, but as I've said, with all local authorities, we have had very good discussions with them, and the officers, Andrew and his team and our consultants and the London Waste Recycling Board have worked together to put the challenge out there to say, well, we think you could do more. Why aren't you reorganising your service? Or could you do this better? Have you looked at that local authority who have worked in partnership with another and have done and have configured their service in a different way? So that's helped to raise ambition. Now that's within the confines of the local authority, with the mayor's powers, and that we're not able to direct a local authority to break a contract. They can review a contract and reissue spec and so on at an appropriate time. But it's very clear that without our intervention, we wouldn't have got the sort of movement that we've got. I'm not sure, the sort of consultation response on the environment strategy was very against setting top-down strategies. I think we've got into a very good place, and we hope to be able to talk about it shortly. And could individual boroughs do more? Yes, when and if they're given the powers and the local and the funding to do more. I talked about it before, about the 100 to 300 million that's needed in infrastructure for some boroughs to be able to do separate food waste collection, for example. That would be very important. That would speed up the ability for boroughs to reach those recycling rates that we need. And then on the other side, we have the commercial food waste and other waste collection services that we've also got to work on as well.
But on the boroughs, so... Because I can't remember, I think the last lot of figures were down for the year.
They were 0.3%
Sorry?
higher. It was, the rate was about 0.3% higher than last year. So it wasn't down, but it wasn't a huge increase. It wasn't
so you're
great,
expecting
but thank God it was
down.
Thank God it was not going down, I think.
But you're expecting all of them to do better next year?
I
It's
can't
clear
say
that they can do, you see. I've looked at all the figures since incineration, and since commingling, and they are really, they're really not up. They've got to catch up.
Some boroughs are doing very well. Some boroughs who have relet their contracts and taken this, really thought about how they're going to do things, like a number of boroughs in South West London you talked about, and Ealing, have seen big increases in recycling rates. The rates, the levels that we're agreeing in the reduction in recycling plans is what we think is the potential to do. What the local authorities have to do is then put the service changes in to get that. So will they deliver that in the next year? Probably unlikely. Some of them may do, but not all of them. But collectively, we think in putting all these service changes in, like separate food waste collection, like doing more on flats recycling, which some of them don't do, doing curbside collection, some of them don't collect glass, and now we'll be collecting glass. Those sorts of things, if we'll put in, will raise the recycling rate by X%, and that will be a great change compared to the the performance that London has seen over the last few years. Can London do more? Yes, of course it can.
Of course it can with all those other things.
But all those
okay,
other things.
I'm reassured by what you're saying.
Mhm.
So I can see the way you're going.
Yeah.
Nikki, I'm just very aware of the time
Yes.
at the moment. Are you nearly...
Yes, I think I just wondered what the power of direction. Have you used it at all?
We've invoked the start of using it with Barnet, but that got them to the table for the discussion, and I think we're in a good place with Barnet. So the point is not to use the power of direction. The point is to get the boroughs to look at the mayor's strategy and to be in general conformity with it, and that's where we got to.
But unless you do use it now and then...
But we started in the process. So the part of the process is it's you have to consult to use it, then you have to consult again, then you have to write, then you have to consult. I mean, it's a very
protracted
complicated and protracted process. But just starting on that process has meant that Barnet came and had a conversation with us. We were able to agree a set of changes where which is now being looked at. So getting them to the table was because of the threat of using the power of direction. But as the mayor has said, and as I've said, we don't want to be in that place, and I don't think boroughs do. Many boroughs don't. They're declaring climate emergencies. Waste is such a big part of that approach. People want to do more on recycling, especially food waste. So more and more of those boroughs are now wanting to do more and are being much more progressive.
Sure. Barnet, the direction was about recycling? Or was it about the fact that they're charging for their...
It's food waste.
It was about food waste?
It was about a food waste collection.
But, I mean, there are not 8 other boroughs that don't collect the food waste?
Yes.
So why Barnet?
Because they had a food waste service and then...
Oh, and they withdrew it?
Took it
away. Just final bit. Are you negotiating with them to stop charging for green waste collection?
I don't know. We'll have to write to you on that one.
They've started charging. Well, I leave you with that one.
Which I think government has said they don't want local
Government are
authorities to do.
fairly neutral on that, and there's no policy position on that.
Sorry?
There's the government have remained fairly neutral on the prospect of charging for green waste. We're waiting to see if they take a stronger stance in either direction on whether that should be brought in as a standard issue or not, to charge or to not charge.
All right.
Thank you, Nikki. Jeanette, can I bring you in?
Yes, of course. Thank you. I've got some ecology questions, a couple of comments before that. Shirley, thank you very much for your kind words, the recognition of the work of myself and Nikki, particularly Nikki and Tony on this committee. It's been very interesting. Now, and can I just say, return the compliment to you in terms of, and I spoke about her last night. For me, I'm sure Samantha would be very pleased with the work that you've done.
I owe Sam a lot, so
and so for me, that's the benchmark, as you know.
Yeah.
And also thank you for all you do with all those organisations that are out there in the same space with the same mission. Now, last night the mayor, before I ask some specific air quality questions, last night the mayor sort of questioned where the government was in its preparedness for COP26, which for those listening, it's the UNCCP, but it's gathering the world together.
That's
about climate change, and I think he said that we weren't as prepared from a sort of organisational point of view as other host cities had been in previous COPs. Away from the government preparedness, can you say a little bit about what the GLA is planning to do, because there will be thousands of governmental presence there in Glasgow. So never mind the government preparedness. What's the mayor's preparedness state is to, if you like, go and bat for London at COP26?
Well, we've been... I should clarify, first of all, that cities don't have a place in the formal negotiating process.
But they're going to be present.
But they will be present. So,
Yes.
so there are two areas that we're working on. One is through the C40, the International Cities Network, of which London was the founder.
Yeah.
And we've been working with the team over there to discuss a number of arrangements. And I was on a call yesterday with on the steering committee that's chaired by the Mayor of LA now, Eric Garcetti, talking about the preparations and the days, what days that they're going to try and convene the cities to come together. And as part of that, we have said that London will be part of that to showcase what we are trying to do, and the great work that the team, but also London generally. We have some fantastic work that's being done by NGOs, by businesses, our business climate leaders, as well as individuals, to really showcase the work of the city, not just the city government, the local authorities as well, on a range of things from transport, divestment, and so on, and using that as a way of lobbying and arguing for greater ambition by government and putting in place the funding streams, the policy frameworks that will really enable London and other cities and places in the UK to really be able to step up and play their contribution in delivering on the UK contribution to their nationally determined contribution, which will then help meet the Paris Agreement. And we know that the UK can't meet its NDC and its sort of share of reduction without London. It's such a big footprint. We're big consumption, big consumers, big producers of emissions from our transport and our buildings. And we talked about energy efficiency and decarbonising of transport as being a key way of doing that. And the other part will then, what does London do? And we have said that we would like to make sure that we do something like we did last year about, bringing people together who are wanting to do more on climate, wanting to show and inspire each other on doing that. And we did something, we did a couple of things last year from the London Climate Action Week and the National Park City Festival. So what we're doing at the moment is trying to think, how might we take this forward, and, bringing the climate and ecological emergency work together, because they're so intertwined, those solutions. It also brings together, we had an International Air Quality Conference here last year where we had the WHO, Dr. Tedros and Dr. Maria Neira, where we talked very clearly that air quality and climate change are so inextricably linked. The health agenda is really a big part of that climate change agenda. It's the sort of thing that resonates with people and countries. Tackling climate change can be a bit sort of arcane. What does it mean? But actually, when you bring it down to, it means people's health. It means economic well-being. It means no stunting of your children's lungs. Those sorts of things. It means greening of our cities, more storage of carbon, the multifunctional use of green belts, those sorts of things. It really sort of resonates with people. So we're trying to do that. And so we will be hosting some events and some convenings over the year. Our plans are a bit awry, obviously, because of the coronavirus and there's sort of uncertainty. But I think rest assured there will be something happening both in London, and London will be participating in COP at Glasgow as part of the sort of non-state actors events.
Well, thank you for that, because the Mayor wasn't able to set out that as clearly as you've just done, and I do think it's important. And but as you said, it's how Londoners feel and how they can have confidence in what's been done in their name. That's so important.
It is. Over 70% of London support, the climate emergency call. Yeah. We had so many people taking part in our tree planting events. You know, lots of letters that we get written into the mayor that, you know, that the team respond to are from school children, you know, want to know what more can we do. Are we doing more on drinking water fountains, sorting out plastic, reducing our emissions, helping London to be more resilient? They're worried about flooding and so on. So, you know, it's out there, and you know, it's sort of our duty, I think, to respond to that and help people, you know, take action when they're feeling, you know, a bit powerless.
Great. Now, so let's just get a couple of air quality questions in. The Mayor's aim is to have the best air quality of any major world city by 2050, going beyond the legal requirements to protect human health and minimise inequalities. I mean, who could argue with that? Is that me? Oh, yeah, it is. Sorry. As at the end of 2019, the Mayor had issued 8 high alerts. Now, we know that the system is up and running, but we're a bit unclear to the extent to which Londoners are using them to reduce their exposure. So how is the Mayor tracking the extent to which Londoners are using his alert services to reduce their exposure?
Well, the alert services are a sort of a message out to schools, and also now through the Resilience Forum through to GPs and care homes. So we, you know, I don't know if you know exactly, but I guess we could track how many people have received the message. We know certainly how many we go out to them. Then it's for the local authority or the school or the care home to take the action, which is to let you know, to let their clientele know that there is an incident coming, and then to manage their exposure either by making sure they've got their relevant medication or to take less exercise and so on. But I don't know if you've got any details on that.
Yeah, so we've done, so I guess the key thing to say about the alert system was how important it was that we started providing that information on a citywide basis in 2016. Following the first year of the scheme, we actually did a review of it to try and see how we could improve it, how we could enhance and change some of the messaging to make sure that they resonated. And one of the key things that we did was we appointed King's College London, who worked in this space for a very long time, as our duty forecaster. So that's been a very important step. And then, as Shirley was saying, to make sure that we could ensure that the alerts were sent more widely. So obviously we used the existing TfL infrastructure. So we used their bus countdown signs, we used the entry boards at London Underground stations, and we also use around 140 roadside dot matrix signs. And because we use those, we know, and TfL have done some analysis on this, that there is that reaches a very large proportion of Londoners as a result. So it's a very effective communication channel. But we wanted, as Shirley was just explaining, to go beyond that. We wanted to make sure that we were providing targeted information with relevant health advice to some of the more vulnerable Londoners. So working with King's College London, we've done 2 things. We have direct messaging to the vast majority of schools in London on moderate, high or very high air pollution episodes. And then with that, they get tailored advice for the school population and if there's anyone with specialist health requirements. And then, in addition to that, using some of the resilience team that we have here at City Hall, we also then cascade messages to other locations like GP surgeries and also to care homes. I think the next stage, which is really important, and we're actually working with Global Action Plan and doing some of this work now, is to make sure that when that information reaches people like health professionals, that they're using it in the most effective way possible to make sure that we are, as you're saying, ensuring that we're getting the right behavioural change as a result of them receiving that information.
Yeah. Can I just say, I've seen, because I need to be mindful of the levels personally. And I've seen the bus stop stuff. But when I'm sitting on the bus, I've always thought I would have liked that information yesterday. And because I'm already out now. And so I would just ask if you can consider like being I don't know, forecast. I don't know if you can forecast it in a better way. And have a bit of talking stuff on buses, because the alerts that I've seen, they flash, but then you're getting off. Whereas I think if you'd use the talking mechanism on the bus, that might have got through. So it's just feedback.
Thank you.
And then, so you seem to be progressing with that work pretty well. And have you yet gone into emergency measures during high and very high pollution episodes? And if you have, can you share a couple of what those measures are?
We've not used emergency measures, so this would be the sorts of things that other cities might consider, where they ban vehicles or I'm not sure what else they do, but all ban sort of wood burning and things like that. So the Mayor doesn't have powers to ban wood burning, and on vehicle restrictions, that would need the agreement of all 33 boroughs as well. So I think what we're trying to do is, through the alerts, to make sure that people are aware of the high pollution episodes, that they're aware that it's coming and that they can manage their exposure, but more importantly is to really take the systemic changes that we've been implementing, cleaning up our buses, cleaning up our taxis, the ultra-low emission zone, the proposed expansion, the tightening of the LES. You know, all of these things are seeing dramatic decreases in pollution incidents and the pollution levels, you know, the legal limits. We've got a report that will be coming out shortly updating the 6-month on performance of the ultra-low emission zone, the central, to let people know what the latest levels are of performance. You know, these are things that we're trying to focus on, because it's not enough for people just to be told it's, you know, the air quality is bad and sort yourself out. We really need to be talking about how do you know, tackle the root cause, and you'll have seen the great figures that I talked about earlier. You know, these things are things that can have a very significant and immediate impact. You know, these are not sort of 5 years time, 10 years time, let's wait for it. You know, we're already 10 years behind where we should have been because of the delay the government has had in implementing the air quality legal limits. So we know what works, and we're getting on and doing that. So we'll be very happy to update you on the latest performance levels when we get the report out.
Great. And there was also a commitment about the bus fleet. In answer to a question, Mayor's Question Time, November 19, we heard that 7,900 buses in the fleet were equivalent of Euro 6 standards or better. That represented 85% of the total fleet. What percentage of the total fleet now is, if you like, in the conditions?
I think it's still about 85%.
Okay.
I think it's near enough 7,000 buses or something. But we're on track for the target, which was to make sure the whole fleet was compliant by October, end of October 2020. So that's going very well, and we're seeing significant reductions in emissions from buses because of that. And when that's complete, then essentially London will be a low emission bus zone itself.
Okay. And so the 9,000 buses are those buses you have, so all new buses, of course, will be compliant.
Yes.
So it's that total that we have to...
It's the existing buses that we're retrofitting or replacing. Yeah.
So the retrofit programme has been absolutely transformational, and obviously some of the other work that we've published earlier this year has been looking at the number of hourly breaches that you had of the nitrogen dioxide hourly legal limit, and there has been a 97% reduction in that. And if you look at some of the low emission bus zones, and Leonie, of course, will know one of those, which was particularly important at Putney High Street, has been absolutely transformational change. If you look at the annual averages at Putney High Street, for example, they've reduced in terms of nitrogen dioxide by about 50%. So it shows you what progress we've been able to make and how important it is that we have prioritised the cleaning up of the bus fleet. And it's just the last bit of the bus fleet that now has to be done over the next few months, so to make sure that by in October this year, all buses will meet that Euro 6 standard.
Okay. And then the sort of difficult bit, taxis and private hire. I say difficult because that's huge numbers. The Mayor was looking to reduce emissions in the taxi and private hire fleet by phasing out fossil fuels, looking to switch into zero emission technologies. So what's the update on that.
It's a great update. It's one of those ones that when the introduction of the requirement came in 2018, January, there were no zero-emission capable taxis on our streets. And it was one of those things where you're thinking, is it really going to happen? And we now have over 3,200 on our streets at the moment. Some of those are the new Dynamo, the all-electric, fully electric. The other, the bulk of them are the low-emission the London Electric Vehicle Company, the old taxi company vehicles. So those lovely ones with the 6-seaters and whatever. So which is absolutely amazing, and partly it's because drivers like them. They recognise there are fuel savings. They're cleaner. They're not having to sit in a box full of diesel. And so they're our best advocates. But it's also been helped by the fact that the Mayor has made available funding for the delicensing of taxis, which has helped drive people taking the very old, dirty, polluting taxis out and either no longer driving them or, and as new ones come in, they have to be zero emission capable at least. So that's gone really well. And then, coupled with that, as I mentioned earlier, was the electric vehicle rapid charging infrastructure, which has really helped drive the take-up of those taxis.
Yeah, I mean, I was in a cab the other night, and he did say pass a message on to the Mayor, so I'll pass it on through you. and he wanted to know that he was well off the Mayor, because this was going to cost him money that he didn't have. Because his taxi was so old, he was going to have to get a new one at £40,000. So if they're so old, the drivers have got to go and get into another mortgage, haven't they?
They've been so the taxi age limit, has taken into account the fact that they are very specialised vehicles and expensive vehicles and so on. But as you pointed out, they are highly polluting, those old vehicles, and this is why the Mayor set up the delicensing scheme to help them. Leave the fleet, and
but that's age-related, isn't it? It doesn't cover the very old ones, does it?
It does do. The very old, so they shouldn't be more than 16 years old.
So there's differing amounts available through the delicensing scheme, but there is an amount available for the very oldest taxis as well. Crucially, separately, there is also funding available through the taxi plug-in grant, which enables a taxi driver to get to up to £7,500 off the cost of those new vehicles. But I think it's also important to bear in mind that there's some interesting stuff happening in the taxi industry at the moment in terms of the number of drivers who are choosing to lease the vehicles. And LEVC have provided a number of products and done a lot of individual work and provide support to taxi drivers looking to make the switch to help them do the calculations. Shirley was talking about the cost savings, which are substantial in terms of fuel usage. And you can actually, in a very economic way, switch to a leased model, which will enable some of these taxi drivers who might have an older vehicle to stay in the market if they so choose to do so. But the package of financial support and other support from LEVC and others is actually, very impressive, and is part of the reason that you're seeing this huge throughput of new zero-emission capable taxis into the London taxi fleet.
And the budget, I think, kept that support at the same level. Yeah.
Okay, I mean, again, we heard a bit of this through an exchange between the Mayor and Assembly Member Curtin, and it may well be useful to, and through my cab driver, to look to see how you can update that trade. Because information is lost, isn't it, by just throwing out the magazine it's in. And then lastly, I think, and then I hand over to you, isn't it, Chair? Or remind me if I've got any others.
You go to 25.
I'll go to 25. How many charging points are there?
There are, I think, over 232 charging points.
245.
245, sorry. They've jumped up.
Yeah, they have just
They have just jumped up. 245 on our way to our target for 300 by the end of 2020, end of this year.
And of course, that's the rapids that are being delivered by TfL. If you look into across the fleet, across the charging infrastructure as a whole, Obviously, you have additional rapids which have been delivered by the private sector, which take us up to about 350 and probably by about 400 by the end of the year. And in addition to that, you also have a range of other charges which have been delivered, particularly the residential scheme, which has been supported through London councils and with the London boroughs through the Go Ultra Low City scheme. And if you take all of those together, there's around 5,000 charge points in London, which is around 25% of all the charge points in the UK. So it's a really significant achievement in terms of the rollout of charging infrastructure in the city.
Okay. And then I want to go on to NOx emissions, a quick question about that. NOx emissions reduced by around a third in the central London ULEZ in its first 6 months of operation. Is the scheme still on track to reduce emissions by the 45% expected in its first year?
We believe so.
Yeah.
And as I mentioned, we'll be publishing a report shortly that will give you the latest data.
Okay. When you say shortly, it's not going to be in the PERDA period, is it?
No.
Well, because we wouldn't want you to do that.
I don't really want to do that either.
And then produce a report saying you hadn't met your goals.
No, when I say shortly, it means very, very shortly. We know we're on a deadline here.
Not that you would do such a thing. We leave that to government departments. Okay, question 24. Now, when we will see the next tranche of emissions and concentration data associated with the ULEZ itself? Is that in this report?
That's in the report.
That's coming. Good. We look forward to that.
The next 5 days.
and I mean, to you, Shirley, and to you, Elliot, were there any sort of standout lessons that you learnt from the rollout that you're sort of now thinking because of that the compliance is going to be high or staying high?
Yeah, you know, it's really interesting. I think, you know, we've had a lot of people coming to talk to us about the ultra-low emission zone and talking about, you know, how it went in and so on. And I think you forget actually so much work went into it. You know, even before, you know, it's about people advocating for it. You know, we've had the sort of technical preparation, which is getting the right things, all the consultations, making sure that we really told people this was coming, consulted them and you know, got people on side. We worked with the health NGOs as well as the green NGOs to make sure that the case was made for it and people understood why it was being brought in, and it was about reducing health impacts. But also, you know, we've done a lot of research, you know, around the health inequalities and reducing, you know, the impacts that people don't realise and really bringing that out. I think those are really important things, you know, giving people time. You know, the Mayor talked about this in his election campaign. You know, we did probably more consultations on a single piece of policy than has ever been done before. There were about 3 consultations, you know, so pre-consultations, then statutory consultations. We gave people time. We brought in a scrappage scheme, 2 scrappage schemes to get people to provide people the support. We've done the lobbying of government. You know, unfortunately, government haven't listened on the, you know, the scrappage scheme, which, you know, and we mentioned this before, this is not just a London problem, this is a clean air problem for the country, and we believe a national vehicle scrappage scheme would be, you know, really, really helpful. So again, it was very disappointing that wasn't picked up yesterday, although I believe there was some funding for other parts of the country. Again, London has missed out. So, you know, it's absolutely down to the Mayor making this a leadership point for him, and making sure that Transport for London is, you know, more than, you know, near enough doubled, you know, the spending is put on air quality that has really driven the changes that we're seeing. But it shows that you can have these really significant and immediate impacts if you just go for it, which is what he's done.
I just want to go on to compliance, and can I just say about compliance, and I think Nikki touched on it earlier, it's great to be going along and working with, but there has to be a point where you identify that there are roads, that there are locations that have not stepped up, and indeed you could argue put in those children and those people at greater risk, or the disadvantage, if you like, for those people in that area is unacceptable because they're Londoners too. So why should they have to live in an area where there's been no action, and 6 roads away, there has been action. So what specific plans does the Mayor have for roads that will continue to breach the legal limits for NOx following expansion of the ULEZ and changes to the London-wide low-emission zone?
So there will be some roads, and what the Mayor has made available is funding through the LIP process to help look at those. And, you know, where there are roads, you know, obviously then there would be taking action. So at the moment we're just trying to evaluate where those hotspots are. But I should point out that, you know, that we're talking about NOx. I don't know if you're going to come on to talk about PM 2.5, but, you know, we are still in breach of the PM 2.5 limits. And that is, you know, that is not going to be solved by just by the ultra low emission zone or the expansion. We are going to have a legally binding target put onto the Environment Bill, and, you know, where the powers that the Mayor has been asking for around construction, around the river, you know, those sorts of sources of emissions really need to be taken on board, because that is you know, the impacts of PM 2.5 of those ultrafine particles are still really pernicious.
Coming on to that.
And the last quick question, Chair, and then I'll hand over to you, is it's about business, really, because, and just say a local story, and the Chair will be aware of it, wearing her other hat as councillor in Islington. It's mind-blowing that an organisation like Ocado can be looking to build a plant next door to a school with an estimated, I think it's 50 vehicle actions per hour at this time. And the borough has handled it. But, you know, how do you reach out to a borough like that? Because I think that borough is lucky that it's on the leading edge, it's got the facilities. But there are some boroughs, because there's another borough in my constituency that doesn't have the capacity. And so industry and business are continuing business as usual. And that can't be appropriate.
No, it can't be. But I would say that there are really good businesses out there who are leading on this. So
yes, I know about the good ones. We're talking about the ones that are in need of, I don't know, bringing together. Are you monitoring that? Are you aware that
so the boroughs are more likely
is
to know,
needed?
Yeah, so the boroughs are more likely to know who, you know, where those you know, those culprits are, I guess. And we offer support through the Mayor's Air Quality Fund, so there's funding there to help boroughs work with their local businesses and their local business improvement districts or their industrial estates about a whole host of things. And we've had some very good projects that have come up showing best practice, and then, you know, producing toolkits and advice and so on, but also practical changes. So some of the zero emission, you know, which is the pioneering stuff, which we want, you know, London to be moving towards, you know, like out on in Hackney in the city fringe, have been some really good examples. But we know we're working out as in Dagenham, you know, with the industrial estate out there where they want to put sort of electric vehicle charging points and so on. So, you know, there is some funding available for that, but we, you know, collectively those businesses should be following the best of the best, really, and start to think, actually, your customers want it, your staff want it, your you know, and as a sort of corporate social responsibility agenda, you should be thinking about these things. So some of that funding is available through what the Mayor provides, or TfL. Some of it is available through the Office of Low Emission Vehicles. You know, it was great to hear that government is putting some funding into zero carbon activity on transportation, but obviously, as we know, nowhere near enough if we're going to get to a 2050, 2030 target, indeed.
Thank you for that, and I will continue to be monitoring your work. Thank you, and to you and your staff for the work that you're doing, and I'll certainly will be continuing in the role that I currently have as a trustee of Global Action Plan.
Thank you, Chair. Well, thank you, Jeanette.
Very good, and thank you, Jeanette, for raising the Ocado depot, because that is
outrageous.
It's really shocking that that they're building a whole new diesel distribution centre, when actually in a location like Islington they could be doing e-assist cargo bikes and electric vans for their deliveries, and it's like it's a dinosaur project that's sort of coming from we are naming and shaming. That's very shocking, but it is shocking, and I think the community has risen up very magnificently to let them know in no uncertain terms how shocking it is.
And the council.
Anyway, I am going to move on to our final few questions so that we can release you to get on with your days. Thinking about businesses, the take-up of the scrappage schemes to start off with was not as massive as it might have been, just sort of 2.6 million out of an available 23 million. So you've made some changes to the scheme to kind of hopefully get more people to take it up. So how is that going? And do you think do you anticipate having to do more to try and get these older, dirtier vehicles from the smaller businesses off the road?
Well, I think it's going much better, and I think it's one of those things you're never quite sure what the take-up is going to be, because and a number of factors, you know, they're small businesses, you know, it's about timing and about cash flow and so on. But we have now a collective sort of spend and value of committed applications in the order of 6.7 million.
That's for the van scheme.
For the van scheme. And for the car and motorcycle scheme, or you know, the one that's targeted at low income people, it's at 3.2 million. So that's, you know, it's going better and more steadily. But I think, you know, obviously we want it to be spent, but it's also about preparation for the expansion of the ultra low emission zone. So that's key. So we have, you know, that's not till October 2021. So we have 18 months-ish for people to be getting ready, and obviously the sooner they get ready the better, because it accrues health benefits and air quality benefits and so on.
So do you think you need to be doing more to get these small businesses alerted to the help that is available to them? And do you think that they're aware of what's out there?
They are aware. We've been working very hard to make sure that they're aware in a number of channels. We worked with the Federation of Small Businesses about changes to the scheme that would make it you know, more widely applicable, which is where we brought in, I think we changed the thresholds and so on. So you know, and they're very comfortable with where we've got to, I think, at the moment.
And I think it's worth saying there's also been, there's been a lot of lessons learned through this process. It's the first time a scheme of this type, a scrappage scheme focused on the environmental benefits, has been delivered. And there's been a lot of targeted work that's been taking place. We've been very clear to TfL it's important that we go and work with those who need the help the most, so people like sole traders at market. So there's been, in terms of our marketing work that we were doing more recently, it's about face-to-face work. And I think that's really important, because these people work very, very hard. You know, if you finish a long day, the last thing you want to do is go home and look online and work out how you apply for something and all of those kind of things. So we have tried to simplify the process as much as possible, and the recent changes that have been made are clearly bearing fruit, and you can see that in the take-up of the scheme. But it is important to bear in mind that the current context is challenging in terms of, obviously, businesses were probably hesitating during the uncertainty of Brexit, and we're now entering another period of some uncertainty, which is probably going to mean that, that not everyone's going to take up the scheme as quickly as perhaps we would have liked. But I think what will happen is that it's really important that the scheme is available in the run-up both to the scheme in October, and also what we'll be doing with the ultra-low emission zone expansion in 2021. So there's still a year and a half for people to take advantage of this funding to prepare for that.
Yeah. You've also got a £15,000 grant for polluting heavy vehicles, which I think was being launched this year. Has that launched, or is it about
Not
to?
yet. Not yet. We're just working up the details. So we announced that it was going to be part of the scheme for up to three vehicles. And we're just finalising the details of the scheme, and we'll launch, I think, when it's appropriate, notwithstanding, as Elliot said, the sort of economic situation or the sort of political, not political, the coronavirus situation might affect that.
Sure. So, but that's aimed at helping businesses to be compliant, ready for.
It's a retrofit solution rather than buying new, and we've had really good pre-registration, with a number of companies and individuals pre-registering their interest. So we know there's likely to be good take-up of that.
Great.
And as well as the retrofit, if someone wanted to, they could use the funding for scrappage as well.
Okay. So then thinking about compliance with NO2 limits, last year I think 34 out of 86 sites monitored in London exceeded the annual legal limits for NO2. So do you have any specific actions to try and address those hotspots? And are there going to be hotspots that you're not monitoring that might also need attention?
Quite possibly. I don't know. It's because the network of monitors is, the fixed monitors are, obviously fixed in certain places. We have the Breathe London monitoring network now, which is giving us a much sort of finer level of detail. So we're understanding, where by time of day as well. So you're able to sort of see, and you're able to track now the sort of pollution incidents, and sometimes you can see that's related to just general traffic, sometimes it might be construction, and sometimes there's something weird going on there, so that enables us or the local authorities to go and work out, well, what is it, and that might be helping to to make that pollution worse in that area.
I think it's worth emphasising the value potentially of the Breathe London network. So obviously one of the examples that came out of the Breathe London network was we identified a new hotspot which was near one of the bus garages. Again, I talked earlier about why it was so important that we've prioritised the cleaning up of the bus fleet across London. That again provided us additional evidence of some of the impact we were seeing from the bus fleet. Of course, we've taken action to address that, which has been very important. And again, you need the information, you need the data to know what the issues are so you can take the action to actually solve and address them. And one of the great things about the Breathe London project is that these sensors, which still have a good degree of accuracy, they're not obviously not quite as robust as a £100,000 monitoring station, but they still give you good data and they can be moved. And so we already, through Breathe London, monitor at 30 schools and 10 hospitals. Obviously, in the budget, we have additional funding to continue the scheme, and now we want to explore about how best we use the network to have a better understanding across London in terms of the use of these sensors. And it's also worth highlighting the partnership that we did with Google, which we think was really innovative, where Google Street View cars actually took measurements across very large swathes of the city. And while we've always had modelling, which has been very robust and very useful in terms of understanding what was going on, being able to collect at all these different locations information about, what was, as Shirley was explaining, what was happening at different times of the day is just invaluable in terms of understanding what the challenges are and helping us design the right policy solutions to them.
Mm-hmm. That's, certainly just that flexibility of technology kind of is clearly a massive help. Now, when it comes to PM 2.5, we're nowhere near getting to where we actually want to be, and that kind of obviously demonstrates that actually electric vehicles, while they're great for they're cleaner than diesel and petrol vehicles, but actually just swapping all the diesel and petrol vehicles into electric vehicles will not sort out our air pollution problem. So I think it was 80% of sites in London recorded levels of PM 2.5 above the World Health Organization kind of guidelines, but obviously there is no safe exposure level, and whether the World Health Organization will change their guidelines at any point is something that we presumably need to bear in mind. But given that the Mayor has pledged to try and meet those WHO guidelines by 2030, do you think that London is on track to achieve that? And do you think that there's a risk that PM emissions could actually rise if we don't manage to bring traffic volumes down?
We have done some studies that show that with the combination of powers that we have and that the mayor, that the government has, we've set out the sort of powers that we've been lobbying for, that we, and DEFRA have done this modelling too, we could meet those targets, the PM 2.5 by 2030. The government, however, seem to be reluctant to take their own department's work into account, and have then said that they won't put a legally binding target on the face of the bill that we, many other metro mayors, local authority leaders, health NGOs, health professionals, everybody says is absolutely critical to put on the face of the bill. So we will carry on advocating for that legally binding target to be on the face of the bill, and recognising that there is no safe limit for PM 2.5, and for the government to say that we will include a target, but let's consult for 2 years and then then we've got 15 years to put it in is shocking, given we know what the health impacts are, which is why the mayor has said, I've adopted this target, the first European mega city, I think, to do that, to take on that WHO target, and to work very hard. So whilst we're doing good stuff on reducing NOx, and it's having some benefit on our PM 2.5 levels, it's nowhere near enough. We know that we need to do more, like expand the ultra-low emission zone, tighten up the low emission zone, do more on tyre and brake wear, wood burning, construction. So the consultation or the budget announcement yesterday about red diesel, it looks like it might affect construction machinery, but TBC whether this is a consultation or whether it's so they may row back, which we put in place things that we might be able to do on construction machinery to drive down the PM 2.5 emissions from construction machinery, but it's through a very complicated process of using planning powers, which thank goodness that we put some funding through the Mayor's Air Quality Fund to support local authorities to do that. But it's not the right way to do it. We should be putting on the face of the bill and getting people to do the right thing.
Yep. I think we can all agree on that. So I've got a final question, which is about encouraging more boroughs to bring forward additional town centre zero emission zones. Now there's a couple, there's the one on the Islington-Hackney border, and there's the one in the City of London.
That's the Beach Street. Yeah.
The Beach Street one, yes. So how many of these zero emission zones would be needed for the mayor to get to a London-wide zero emission zone by 2050?
I don't think we've looked at it like that. I think what we've said is that each individual town centre or local authority needs to work out where is the best place to do that, and many of them have expressed interest. I think what we have done, given our Transport Authority sort of function through TfL, is to provide the guidance on how you might do that in a way that is consistent across London, so that you don't have a zero emission zone with a slightly different requirement here and a different one over there, which then businesses have to try and navigate. What they want is some consistency across that. So that's what we've given.
Does that has that guidance come out?
That guidance has come out. It's gone to the boroughs. And what we're working on now is a set of tools that can help boroughs. I think working with the European Union-funded project to help, again, to help design those zero emission zones in a bit more detail. And I think we're partnered with the City of London on that. So, and then obviously we're doing things like Car Free Day to get people to understand what what a zero emission zone, a car free zone might look like. And they're really great examples of what it might feel like and be like to live in or to work in one of these areas. The Beach Street one is coming, but the one on the Hackney City Fringe, when people realise this is what it could be like, and how much nicer it is, I think that there's nothing more powerful than a good demonstration project.
Absolutely, yes. More good demonstration projects, please. Okay, thank you very much. That was a marathon session. Thank you to all your advisors. And I'd also just like to just take this opportunity to say a word or two about some of our Assembly members who are not going to be on the committee. I mean, obviously, Leonie and I have to find out whether we get re-elected or not. But Jeanette and Nikki, and also Tony, who's had to leave us, have been on this committee, I think, for a long time.
20 years.
20 years on this committee. Wow. Yes, just I want to wish you well. Thank you very much for all that you've contributed during this 4 years while Leonie and I have been chairing. And just to say that we will miss your input enormously, and just thank you for all your very constructive contributions to the work and life of the committee.
Can I say thank you to you and to Leonie for your leadership in the last 4 years, and also to Shirley and her team, who've been phenomenal over the last 4 years. It's been absolutely, it's been wonderful, because before that we had 8 years of something else.
Yeah.
And I don't want to get political.
No, don't get political. Don't spoil it.
But
we're being so marvellously non-political and thanking each other.
And I just wanted to say that
we had a sense of how great the move had to be, put it like that.
Yes, and also, just as Jeanette said, she will be keeping in touch through Global Action, and I would also hope to keep in touch through the work I'm going to do on climate change and urban planning.
Definitely.
So, thank you all of you.
Well, we look forward to being able to recycle you as guests at some future point, but I think we might have to promise not to have you in and cross-question you for 3 hours, because I'd like to thank Shirley and her team for actually what has been, I think, possibly our longest session.
Ever.
No, not ever, because I'm pretty sure we've had some long meetings, but that's been a really long one. But it's really been a very good review. Maybe not of the whole of the last 20 years, but some of the contributions from our colleagues here has been able to bring in some of that. So I think it's been a very helpful meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.
So thank you. So I just have a few items of formal business to finish off. Can I ask the committee to note the report and the subsequent discussion?
Noted.
And delegate authority to me as chair in consultation with party group lead members to agree any output arising from the discussion.
Agreed.
Can I ask the committee to note the additional activity undertaken since our last meeting?
Noted.
Namely the informal briefing we received from the GLA air quality team, which it was great, so thank you very much for that. The London Assembly's annual meeting will be taking place on the 15th of May, and we'll decide which committees to establish for the 2020-21 Assembly year and a timetable for those committees, so we can't set the next meeting date. There are no other items of urgent business, so the meeting is over. Thank you very much.
GLA, Chamber, Sound.